Sometimes, "till death do us part" doesn't last long at all. Sweet, tender feelings can quickly turn into frustration, disappointment, and even outright hatred. In those cases, the most reasonable thing to do is end the relationship, if not as friends, then at least not as enemies. But when large sums of money and the chance to get rich fast enter the picture at the cost of an ex-lover's life, an unsuspecting person's fate could be sealed. Gary Bentley's case is hardly unique. People have been killed for far less, but in this instance, the killer was hoping to pocket $1 million and secure a life of ease and comfort. Did Gary himself sense what might happen? His parents think he did. They had a bad feeling and were worried about him, trying to protect him. But Gary couldn't fully believe that the love of his life, the mother of his child, was actually capable of murder. He fought hard to save his crumbling marriage for the sake of his son, but in the end, he ended up in the grave, and the boy was left an orphan, even though his mother was still alive. So, what do we know about Gary Bentley and his early life? Gary Louis Bentley was born on August 31st, 1984, in a small rural town called Louisville, located in Jefferson County, Kentucky. He was the youngest of two kids born to Gerald and Lisa Bentley. Gary grew up with his older sister Amy, and they had a close, trusting relationship from an early age. The Bentley family ran their own farm and worked hard to make sure their kids had everything they needed, including a good education. The kids pitched in too, and didn't shy away from the hard physical work that came with running a farm. The whole family was tight-knit, caring for each other and always offering support. From a young age, Gary spent a lot of time with his dad, Gerald. They were very close, often going fishing, hunting, and camping together. His dad taught him how to handle a gun, shared survival skills like how to navigate the wilderness, and showed him where to find edible mushrooms and berries. As a teenager, Gary developed a serious interest in firearms. He knew how to handle them and eventually started collecting guns. Nearly every weekend, he and his dad would go hunting or fishing, and they were best friends. Gary was the definition of a small-town guy, a real handyman who could build or fix just about anything. People around him would describe him as kind-hearted, easygoing, and always willing to help anyone in need. Gary did well in school, stayed away from bad influences, didn't have any bad habits, and never got into trouble with the law. He was a quiet, homebody type of kid who always put his family first. After high school, Gary went to college in the state capital, Frankfurt, where he majored in engineering. After graduating, he moved back to his hometown of Louisville, starting out as a basic electrician, but he quickly worked his way up the ladder. The one and only love. While in college, Gary met a girl named Tasha, who became the love of his life. She was about 1.5 years older than him, but the small age gap didn't bother them at all. They started dating pretty quickly and in 2006 moved in together, settling not far from Gary's parents' home. Tasha was studying to be a nurse and, after getting her degree, landed a job at one of the city's hospitals, where she quickly earned the respect and admiration of her co-workers. She didn't stop there, though. She decided to continue her education and kept working to advance her career. In 2012, Gary and Tasha finally made it official, throwing a big wedding and inviting all their family and friends. Soon after, Tasha got pregnant, and the couple was overjoyed. In the spring of 2013, they welcomed a baby boy and named him Connor. By the time their first child was born, both Gary and Tasha's careers were thriving. They were making good money and were able to move into a bigger, more comfortable home, buy 2 cars, travel, and basically live without worrying about money. Gary dreamed of having a big family and wanted at least 2 more kids with Tasha, but things started to fall apart just a few years later. What was Tasha hiding? The first 4 years of their marriage were perfect. People saw them as a model couple. They had respected, well-paying jobs, were amazing parents, good friends, and gracious hosts. The couple often threw parties at their home, inviting family and close friends. They were always the first to step up if someone needed help or support. Gary's parents, Gerald and Lisa, couldn't have been happier with their daughter-in-law and grandson. But in 2016, things started to change rapidly. The Bentley marriage hit a rough patch, and their relationship began to deteriorate. It all started when Tasha began having problems at work, something that had never happened before. She constantly complained about her coworkers, her boss, and the unbearable working conditions. Gary did his best to support her, but he advised her not to quit too quickly, since finding another job with a good salary wouldn't be easy. In the fall of 2016, trying to take a break and relieve some stress, the couple decided to go on vacation. They left their son with Gary's parents and flew to a resort. They went to Jamaica with their longtime friends, Annie and Kevin Day, who they had been close with for years. The first few days of the trip were perfect. They all had fun, relaxed on the beach, explored the island, and enjoyed each other's company. But Tasha seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. She was constantly texting someone and got very defensive if anyone asked her who she was talking to. The longer they stayed on the island, the more Gary and Tasha started arguing. According to their friends, the fights seemed to come out of nowhere and quickly escalated into full-blown arguments, which made Annie and Kevin uncomfortable. One day, during a yacht trip, Gary and Tasha got into yet another argument, and to ease the tension, Kevin tried to make a joke. In response, Gary splashed beer in his face. Kevin didn't take it too personally, understanding that Gary's reaction wasn't really about the joke, but more about the stress caused by Tasha. Gary, feeling embarrassed afterward, apologized several times, admitting he didn't know what came over him. The new job. Shortly after they returned home from vacation, Tasha told Gary she had quit her job. Gary wasn't happy about her decision since losing such a good income could hurt their family's financial situation. However, being a responsible and frugal person, he had some savings that could help them get by and maintain their lifestyle until she found another job. But just a day after quitting, Tasha was hired as a consultant at a big pharmaceutical company. This was odd because she hadn't mentioned finding a job before quitting. It seemed like someone might have helped her land the position, but Tasha brushed it off as pure luck, saying she stumbled across the interview by chance. Although Tasha seemed happy with her new job, things didn't get better at home. She was rarely around, stopped cooking, didn't take care of the house, and showed little interest in what was going on with Gary. She even neglected their son, leaving most of the parenting to his grandparents. On the weekends, Mrs. Bentley started leaving town, saying she had work trips. She was constantly on the phone with someone, always finding a private spot so no one could overhear the conversation. When asked, she insisted it was work-related and that she needed to discuss things with her colleagues or bosses. She also put a password on her phone, something she had never done before, so no one could check it. She became secretive and distant. Gary, on the other hand, was the one taking care of their son, pouring all his love and attention into him. He practically lived for the boy, spending all his free time with him and doing everything possible to make sure he didn't feel neglected. Despite the constant fights and his wife's indifference, Gary still loved her and hoped to save their marriage, if only for their child's sake. Family trip to Mexico. Gary's parents, seeing the tension building in their son's family, decided to surprise him, Tasha, and their grandson with a trip to one of the most beautiful resorts in Mexico. They chose a cozy hotel in a secluded area, hoping it would give them a peaceful environment to reconnect and spend quality time together. There wasn't much cell service there, and the internet was weak and often cut out. This allowed the family to enjoy each other's company, hang out at the beach, and take long walks. However, Tasha was visibly frustrated by the lack of connectivity. She was always trying to make phone calls or find a signal to send messages. She got angry, lashing out at Gary and his parents, even yelling at their young son. Gary's dad, Gerald, found her behavior strange and decided to have an honest talk with his son. He shared his suspicion that Tasha might be having an affair. Gary tried to laugh it off, but from the look in his eyes, Gerald could tell his son had the same thoughts, but was trying to pretend everything was fine. The couple argued every day, and Tasha demanded they cut the vacation short and return home, citing some urgent work matters. Eventually, she packed her bags and announced she would fly back alone. This forced the rest of the family to leave early with her, even though their stay at the hotel was paid for another week, and they didn't get any refunds. A strange string of fires. In the spring of 2017, Tasha called her father-in-law, Gerald, sounding distressed. She asked him to come help her and pick her up. She explained that her car had caught fire at a gas station and was completely destroyed. She needed to go to her insurance company and then head back home. Of course, Gerald rushed to help her, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. This was the third time in the years she had been with Gary that one of her cars had mysteriously burned up. Each time it happened at a gas station, and the car was reduced to nothing but scrap metal, making it impossible to determine the real cause of the fire. Every time, the incidents were blamed on faulty gas station equipment, and Tasha always received hefty insurance payouts. These fires happened about every 3 years, and Tasha would insure the cars for the maximum amount just before the fires occurred, always using different insurance companies. She claimed to have no idea how it happened, and some friends and family even thought she might have enemies who were purposely sabotaging her cars. Still, after each accident, Tasha bought a newer, more expensive car. The insurance companies had no grounds to deny her claims, even though the fires followed a suspicious pattern. Proving deliberate property damage was next to impossible. The not-so-secret affair. By the summer of 2017, Tasha was disappearing almost every weekend, explaining it as work trips. She became more distant from Gary and their son, living what seemed like a separate life. Friends, family, and even the Bentleys' neighbors began to suspect that Tasha was having an affair. These rumors hit Gary hard. He stopped trying to joke about it and would either stay quiet or quickly change the subject. Gary's parents tried several times to talk to him, telling him that things couldn't go on like this since, essentially, the marriage had already fallen apart. But Gary always responded the same way. He still loved his wife and was determined to keep the family together for Connor's sake. He held on to the hope that Tasha would come to her senses, reconsider her priorities, and that things would go back to the way they were. In November 2017, Gary, Tasha, and their son went to his parents' house to celebrate Thanksgiving. Gary's sister, Amy, also came with her family. When everyone started exchanging gifts, it turned out that Tasha hadn't bought any, saying she was too busy with work. She apologized and left, promising to fix it and return soon. She was gone for hours, but came back empty-handed, without buying anything, not even for her son. When everyone gave her confused looks, she claimed the lines everywhere were too long, and it would have taken her all night to get through them. This time, Amy couldn't hold back. She pulled Gary aside and asked him point blank if he realized that Tasha was probably seeing someone else and wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Gary simply responded that they would handle it themselves. A gun safe in the bedroom. The following weekend, Gary called his dad and asked him to come over and bring some tools. Gerald was happy to help and showed up at his son's house within half an hour with everything needed. As mentioned earlier, Gary had been collecting guns since his youth, and his house was filled with pistols, hunting rifles, shotguns, and more. He even had some rare items scattered across different rooms. But now, Gary suddenly decided to install a safe in his house, gather up all his firearms, and lock them away. This sudden decision worried Gerald a little, so he asked Gary why he suddenly wanted to hide his gun collection. Gary didn't give a clear answer, but Gerald could tell his son was afraid of something, and it didn't seem like he was worried about burglars. Later, when Tasha got home, She explained that it was her idea because she was scared and felt like they might be in danger. Her words seemed strange, but at the time, Gerald didn't think much of it. Only a few days remained before the tragedy. The mysterious murder at home. On Sunday, December 10th, 2017, Tasha called her father-in-law, telling him she hadn't been able to reach Gary all day, and when she got home, the garage door was open. She was too scared to go inside, worried that burglars might have broken in, and asked Gerald to come over. Thankfully, Connor was safe, staying with his grandparents, and Gary was home alone. Gerald rushed over as fast as he could. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. The garage door was indeed ajar, but there were no signs of forced entry. Inside the house, everything looked normal. Nothing appeared to be missing, and there were no indications of an intruder. Gerald called out to his son several times, but there was no response. When he walked into the bedroom, he found Gary's lifeless body lying on the bed. In shock, Gerald tried to perform CPR, but Gary's body was already cold, showing signs of rigor mortis. He immediately called 911, still unable to believe his son was gone. It wasn't until later that he noticed the gun safe in the bedroom had been broken into and some of the firearms were missing. The forensic findings. When the forensic team arrived, they determined that Gary had been killed by a single gunshot to the head, fired at close range. Since he was lying on his side in bed in a sleeping position and had no other injuries or signs of a struggle, it was likely that he was asleep and didn't even hear the killer approach. The crime didn't look like a typical robbery. Valuables, a jewelry box, and even cash left in plain sight were untouched. This indicated that the main target was the gun safe. However, only a few guns were taken, none of which were particularly valuable. Neither these nor the guns that remained were the murder weapon. The main suspect. From the start of the investigation, Gary's wife, Tasha, was the primary suspect. For one, she didn't seem like a grieving widow. She calmly spoke with the detectives, detailing the day's events leading up to when she and her father-in-law found the body. Second, all of the couple's friends and family confirmed that Gary and Tasha's marriage had been on the rocks for a while, and they were close to divorce. Third, the Bentleys had two large dogs that barked at anyone but their owners, yet the neighbors hadn't heard any barking, and Gary would have likely woken up from the noise if they had. Tasha claimed that Gary had planned to go hunting that day, and she had left the house to run some errands. She said that she'd tried to call him after lunch, but she hadn't been able to get through. Not too concerned, she chalked it up to bad reception. On her way home, she stopped by a friend's house, which her friends confirmed when questioned. There were no witnesses to the crime. No one heard anything suspicious or saw any strangers that day. Even surveillance footage from nearby cameras yielded no useful clues. The crime appears to have been a carefully planned crime, unsuccessfully staged as a robbery. $1 million insurance policy. Annie Day, one of Tasha's friends, called her to offer her condolences and ask if she could help with funeral arrangements. Tasha's response stunned Annie. She said that Gary's parents were handling the funeral because she had more important things to take care of. Those more important things turned out to be a trip to the insurance company for a large payout. Apparently, shortly before the murder, Tasha had convinced Gary to take out $1 million life insurance policy. Gary, in an effort to please his wife, agreed, although he wasn't thrilled about it. A few days before the crime, Tasha tried to increase the payout to $2 million, but she failed. Now there was a clear motive. However, there was still no hard evidence linking Tasha to the murder. At the same time, details surfaced about her 3 previous burned-out cars, each of which had resulted in large insurance payouts. It became clear that Tasha had pulled similar insurance tricks before. Lover or accomplice? One of Tasha's friends said that Tasha had been dating a co-worker named Anthony for over a year, and he was the one who helped her get a new job. Investigators decided to question Anthony about his involvement in the crime, suspecting that he may have helped his lover. Anthony admitted that he had a long-standing romantic relationship with Tasha and revealed that they met regularly at his home. He claimed that Tasha was planning to leave Gary, and they even planned to celebrate New Year's Eve 2018 together. When Anthony realized that he was being considered as a suspect in the murder investigation, he rushed to provide an alibi. He stated that on the day of the murder, he was at his parents' house helping them with renovations. They made several trips to thrift stores that day, all of which were captured on surveillance cameras. Detectives concluded that Tasha had likely acted alone, which explained why there were no signs of a break-in and why the dogs hadn't barked. But the murder weapon and the missing guns from the safe remained a mystery. Tasha's version of events. Tasha kept changing her story, adding new details, and sometimes trying to shift the blame onto others. She even brought up the conflict between Gary and Kevin Day during their vacation when Gary threw beer in his friend's face. According to Tasha, Kevin might have held a grudge and used this as an opportunity for revenge. However, a few hours into her interrogation, Tasha finally cracked and confessed. She admitted to killing her husband, but blamed Gary for what happened. Tasha claimed that Gary was abusive, both to her and their son, and that on the day of the murder, he had once again hit their child. She said that was the last straw, and after waiting for Gary to fall asleep, she grabbed a gun. However, none of Tasha's claims were backed up. None of Tasha's friends or family supported her claims. In fact, everyone stood by Gary, saying he was a devoted, loving husband and the most caring father they had ever known. They insisted he would never lay a hand on his wife, let alone their young son, whom he adored. Even the child confirmed that his dad had never hurt him or his mom. Tasha eventually revealed the hiding spot where she had stashed the guns taken from the safe, including the murder weapon, a pistol. Interestingly, the gun had Anthony's fingerprints on it. As it turned out, Tasha had given the gun to her lover to hold, leaving his prints behind. Her plan was to frame him if things didn't go as expected, but she confessed before she could put that part of the plan into action. Trial and sentencing. The trial for Gary's murder began in June 2021. According to the prosecution, the primary motive for the crime was money. Tasha hoped to collect the $1 million insurance payout and planned to use part of that money to renovate Anthony's house, where she intended to move in the near future. On July 20th, 2021, Tasha Bentley was found guilty of premeditated murder and attempting to mislead the investigation. She was sentenced to 55 years in prison, with the possibility of parole no earlier than 2037. As for little Connor, who lost both his father and mother in one tragic moment, he is now being raised by his paternal grandparents. This crime was featured on an episode of Investigation Discovery titled American Monster. Taking the life of one's children is not just a heinous criminal offense. Such a desperate step can be pushed by a woman's altered consciousness under strong substances or by a painful psycho-emotional state when the body cannot cope with stress. The high-profile case of Veronica Youngblood has become a vivid and horrible example of how disturbed psyche, unhealthy relationships, and constant stress can lead to irreversible consequences. Veronica committed a terrible crime, but at the trial, the young woman claimed that despite what she had done, she had always been a good mother and wished her children only good. This story evokes both anger and pity, but to understand what exactly pushed Veronica to such a terrible and inhumane act, you need to look back a few decades and see what she had to go through. Perhaps her own childhood traumas played no small part in this, but this does not absolve her of responsibility. Veronica Youngblood's abusive childhood. Veronica Youngblood, maiden name Castro, was born in 1986 in the suburbs of Santa Rosa in central Argentina. She was the eldest of two daughters in the family and was raised with her sister Mara, who was born in 1988. The girl's childhood was poor and full of hardship, but not even hunger and lack of basic necessities was the worst. Her parents did not work anywhere, abused alcohol, and took their anger out on their eldest daughter, beating her almost daily, sometimes to such an extent that she could not walk. Grandfather also did not harbor any warm feelings for his own granddaughters, considering them extra hungry mouths that need to be fed. From an early age, Veronica got used to the fact that she had nowhere to wait for protection and support. She felt superfluous in her own family, and the only truly close person to her was only her younger sister. When the girl was 14 years old, her parents divorced and separated. Her father was not interested in the fate of his daughters, but her mother, who was actively trying to organize her personal life, did not need children. Veronica was forced to become an escort to support herself and her younger sister without any education because she saw no other way out. At the age of 15, she became pregnant, and at the age of 16, she gave birth to her first child, a daughter, Sharon. She never gave her eldest daughter's father's name, and probably didn't know it herself, having gotten pregnant by one of her many clients. A follower of a strange cult. As a teenager, without support and help, the girl joined a rather strange South American religious cult called Umbanda. It was a combination of heterogeneous beliefs and cult positions, among which were the foundations of Catholicism, spiritualism, and African cults. In Umbanda, it is customary to honor spirit guides who are able to communicate with the souls of dead people. The followers of the cult also believe in reincarnation and spiritual development through various practices. Veronica, being an impressionable and driven girl, was quickly imbued with the peculiarities of this belief, and according to the memories of her younger sister, she herself began to believe that she could make contact with spirits and communicate with the dead. Veronica did talk about hearing voices and seeing dreams, and also believed that after death, the soul of each person is reborn for a better life. Most likely, such a specific religious cult was fertile ground for the development of mental illness, given Veronica's difficult childhood and her own parents' abuse of her. The other followers of the cult treated her with kindness and love, which is what she lacked the most, so she believed literally every word they told her, moving to the United States, meeting Ronald Youngblood. When exactly Veronica decided to move to the United States of America, it is not known, but it happened in the late 2000s, when she was a little more than 20 years old. Taking her young daughter, she settled in Hampton Roads, in the state of Virginia. There, the attractive young woman took a job with an escort service company. In late 2008, Veronica met a guy whose name was Ronald Youngblood. He was a few years older than her and served as a pilot in the U.S. Navy. He and Veronica first met when Ronald used the services of the company she worked for. Apparently, Ronald was immediately attracted to this young person because he himself expressed a desire to continue to communicate. Soon he insisted that Veronica left the escort, after which they began to live together. And in 2009, in one of the chapels in Las Vegas, the couple officially legalized their relationship, arranging a modest ceremony without guests. After the wedding, Veronica's life became stable for the first time, and she was not afraid to look into the future and confidently made plans. She had her own home, a caring husband with a stable job, who fully provided for her, while Veronica could be engaged in creating home comfort. But most importantly, Ronald took her daughter Sharon as his own, surrounding her with care and love. In 2013, the couple had their common child, daughter Brooklyn. The couple was over the seventh heaven from happiness, and the eldest heiress was happy that she had a baby sister, Sharon Youngblood. After the wedding, Ronald gave Veronica and her oldest daughter his last name, although officially the child he did not adopt. Nevertheless, the girl called him Daddy and reached out to him. Ronald himself tried not to deny her anything, paid attention, and engaged in the upbringing of the child. Sharon grew up quite bright, sociable, and purposeful girl. She studied well in school, had a lot of friends, was active and friendly. From an early age, she was involved in sports, was a member of the school cheerleading team, played tennis, but the girl achieved the greatest success in figure skating. Coach, who worked with Sharon, noted how easy and at ease she felt on the ice, as if in his native element. In childhood and adolescence, she regularly participated in various figure skating competitions, where she repeatedly won prizes. She was prophesied a brilliant sports career, noting the tenacity and diligence of the young figure skater, but alas, it was not destined to come true. Unstable family life. After several years of living together, the relationship between Ronald and Veronica began to deteriorate. Both spouses had difficult characters. They were excessively emotional and unyielding. If at first they managed to find compromises, then now neither of them did not want to make concessions. Moreover, the spouses began to do many things to each other for evil, because of which between them often began to erupt scandals with violent clarification of relations, mutual accusations, and insults. In addition, Ronald was very jealous and overbearing. If before the wedding he promised to forget about what his chosen one used to do, now he reminded her of it, every chance he got. He said that he pulled her out of the mud, provided for her, took her child, and now he demands to live by his rules. Family quarrels began to escalate into physical assaults, with the husband and wife taking turns to be the instigators of the fights. The police received complaints of domestic violence from both sides, but in most cases, these reports were soon withdrawn, and the spouses continued to live together. To be fair, the children were not involved in their parents' squabbles and were never physically hurt, although their emotional state can only be guessed at. In 2014, Ronald was sent to Central America, to the Republic of Honduras for duty, and his family followed him. During this period, relations between the spouses became very acute. Veronica complained to the local police that her husband was raising his hand against her, restricting her finances by blocking her card and forbidding her to use the internet and car. Ronald later said in his defense that he did so because he found out that his spouse was cheating on him. The husband thought that by depriving his wife of money, personal transportation, and the ability to communicate with her lover, he would keep her at home. As a result, Veronica filed a complaint with the U.S. Embassy and had her husband extradited from Honduras and returned to the United States. However, this incident did not affect his career, and he was soon transferred to Washington, D.C., to the main department of the country's Navy. However, relations between the couple finally soured. Breakup and ongoing conflicts. In 2016, the spouses moved to Florida, the place of Ronald's new appointment. By that time, they had already virtually separated, but continued to live together under one roof, and Ron still fully supported Veronica and daughters. By the beginning of 2017, the family moved again, this time to the small town of Oakton, which is in the state of Virginia, where the spouses began the official divorce process. But even during the dissolution of marriage, Ron and Veronica did not separate. They lived in the same house, although apparently they simply could not stand each other anymore. Both later claimed that no matter what, they wanted to raise children together, but in fact, Veronica had no source of income and could not even rent a room for herself. The issue of future custody of the children became especially acute, and Veronica realized that she would not be able to raise the children on her own because they were all completely dependent on Ronald. He also realized this and did not miss the opportunity to remind his wife of this, sometimes descending to outright blackmail, which brought the young woman to hysterics. At some point, driven to despair, Veronica decided to take a loan from the bank to have at least some of their own funds. However, as a guarantor, she specified her still legal husband without informing him. When Ronald received a call from the bank, another scandal broke out. Naturally, he refused to act as guarantor, and the actions of his wife became for him another reason to humiliate her. True, a couple of months later, the couple was finally able to agree, and the scandals between them for a while subsided. According to the court decision, they could continue to live together, and together bring up their children, while neither of them will be charged alimony. But that truce didn't last long. In the fall of 2017, Ronald filed a lawsuit against Veronica, accusing her of aggressive and inadequate behavior. He stated that the spouse smashed his smartphone, launching it into the wall, drowned in a basin of water with a working laptop, and also smashed the windshield of his car with a stone. After that, Veronica was obliged to move out and forbade her to go near Ron. At the same time, the youngest daughter, Brooklyn, was temporarily given full custody of her father until the next court hearing. 3 weeks later, the divorce proceedings were finalized. But having received a certificate of divorce, the former spouses began to live together again, and, it seemed, even reconciled. Courts and custody battle. About 6 months later, the former spouses appeared in court together again, but this time they provided a multi-page agreement detailing their plan for custody of their shared daughter. All the matter is that Ronald was transferred to the state of Missouri, and the former wife and children moved with him. But before Veronica wanted to officially settle a number of nuances regarding the custody of their daughter, Brooklyn. The agreement stated that Ronald would provide his ex-wife with housing that would be close to his home so they could raise their daughter together. The court approved the document in April 2018, and the move itself was scheduled for August of that year. But a month later, Veronica unexpectedly changed her decision and went to court again. The young woman turned for help to a lawyer, who had to confidently draw up and make a number of changes to the previously approved agreement. Veronica said she was doing this because of changed circumstances. By then, she had finished her nursing school training and had been offered a job in Oakton with a good salary. That way, she could more or less support herself and the girls, and there was no need to move after her ex-husband. In addition, the new job promised to help her find and pay for her own place to live. Due to her new circumstances, Veronica now sought full custody of her daughter Brooklyn, which she specified in an amendment to the agreement. The new hearing was held in July 2018, a month before the previously scheduled departure to Missouri. But the court refused to make any changes to the previously approved agreement, and the former spouses were to move to another state to share custody of their shared daughter, as previously agreed. Veronica seemed to agree with the court's decision, as she made no further attempt to challenge it. 2 weeks after the last court hearing, Ronald filed a legal notice with his new address where he would live after the move, which was less than a month away. Only a few minor details needed to be finalized, and he was on his way. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, but Sharon and Brooklyn had only days to live. Disturbing call. Toward evening, on August 5, 2018, emergency services received a disturbing call from 15-year-old Sharon. The girl was crying and gasping in pain. She begged to be saved and talked about how much she wanted to live. She said she was badly injured, and when the cameraman asked what had happened, she said she had just been shot with a gun by her own mother. According to Sharon, she and her younger sister were asleep when their mom walked into the room and shot Brooklyn. At the sound of the gunshot, the older sister woke up and was literally numb with fear. She asked her mom, "What are you doing?" Veronica replied that she was taking her daughters to God. Sharon tried to run away, but Veronica shot her in the back. With her last strength, she made it to the next room, where she locked herself in and called emergency services. The operator assured Sharon that help was on its way and asked her to hold on for a few more minutes, but then he heard the girl screaming in despair, followed by another gunshot. Then there was a frightening silence and the call was cut off. The police and paramedics arrived on the scene by 10 o'clock in the evening, and a horrifying picture was revealed before them. By this time, Ronald, who was on business in another city, had also called the emergency services, asking them to send someone to his house immediately because his ex-wife, according to him, might have done something terrible. Veronica had already called him and told him everything, but Ron refused to believe in the truth of her words. Sharon was the first to be found lying on the floor with 2 gunshot wounds, one to the chest and one to the back. Amazingly, despite the massive blood loss, she still had a faint pulse and was desperately clinging to life. Sharon was quickly taken to the intensive care unit of the nearest hospital, but despite the efforts of doctors, the next day, she died. Brooklyn's breathless body was discovered in her bedroom, in her own bed. She had been killed by a single gunshot to the head. The girl's father arrived about an hour later, rushing home as fast as he could. But Veronica's whereabouts remained unknown until the emergency services received another call from one Manuel Bellows, who reported Veronica's whereabouts. Who is Manuel? Manuel was one of the lawyers the young woman consulted with in the spring of 2018 regarding custody of her youngest daughter. Veronica, as the lawyer later argued in court, immediately struck him as a rather serious, collected, and responsible young woman fighting for custody of her beloved daughters. In addition, she was very attractive in appearance, divorced, and not in a relationship at the time. The two soon hit it off, quickly developing into a tumultuous love affair. Only a few months later, Manuel noticed some oddities in her behavior, which alerted him in particular. It was the religious views of Veronica and her frightening statements about the upcoming meeting with God. At the end of July, Veronica called Manuel and invited him to her home, saying that they needed to have a serious talk. When he arrived, the young woman was home alone. Her ex-husband and children were staying with Ronald's relatives. The lights were off in the house, but candles were burning everywhere, creating a romantic atmosphere, and there was a dinner for two on the table. She confided in him that she had lost the nursing position she had been looking forward to and had refused to move to another state because of it. Veronica also shocked her boyfriend with the news that she was pregnant by him. This information was later unconfirmed. Manuel did not know how to react to this, and Veronica tried to seduce him and inclined him to intimacy. According to Manuel, nothing happened between them that night because he felt a strange discomfort and threat coming from Veronica, as if his life was in danger. He asked her for time to think about how to proceed, and then hurriedly left her house. On the evening of August 5th, Manuel heard someone ring the doorbell at his house. He opened the door and saw Veronica on the doorstep. She was frighteningly calm, and there was no emotion on her face at all. Veronica asked to be let into the house, but before Manuel could do so, he saw a gun in her hands, and he was scared shitless. He said he would call the police if she did not leave immediately, but Veronica, with the same stony face, replied that he could do so since she no longer cared. She then added that she had killed her daughters, so the police were already looking for her anyway. After these words, Manuel got really scared. He closed the door and hurried to the phone. While Veronica went back to the rental car, she came in and just waited to be arrested. The arrest and the full picture of the crime. When the police arrived at Manuel's house, Veronica was sitting in the car in the driver's seat, and next to her, in the passenger seat, lay the loaded gun she had used hours earlier to shoot her daughters. The young woman did not resist. There was still no emotion on her face. In addition to the gun, 2 more full magazines were found in the car. Already at the station, Veronica confessed that she had bought the gun 10 days ago at an exhibition in order to kill her daughters and then take her own life. According to her, she decided to take this desperate step to take revenge on her ex-husband and prevent him from taking their common daughter, Brooklyn. She also added that her personal life didn't work out and she became depressed. Apparently, the eldest daughter noticed the strange behavior of her mother and suspected something wrong because a few days before the tragedy, she directly asked her if she was going to kill them. But what the mother answered her remains a mystery. In the afternoon, on August 5th, Veronica gave her daughters sweets, in which she had previously mixed sleeping pills so that the girls would not resist. When they went to their room and fell asleep, the mother took out a prepared gun, loaded it, and went to her daughters. First, she went to Brooklyn's crib, put the gun to her head, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot woke up Sharon, who didn't immediately realize what was happening, and asked her mother about it. Veronica replied that she would take her and her sister to God, then pointed the gun at her eldest daughter. But Sharon jumped out of bed, rushing to the door, and was immediately shot in the back. She managed to run to the next room and call for help while her mother tried to open the door. When Veronica did enter the room, Sharon screamed and took a second bullet to the chest. Veronica then called her ex-husband and told him what she had done and was now going to take her own life as well. She blamed Ronald for everything, saying that she hated him and that he had ruined her life. However, the young woman then changed her mind about leaving her life for some reason and went to her boyfriend's house, where she was arrested. Young Blood fully admitted her guilt, and when she was asked what punishment she would give herself, the woman said that it should be the death penalty. It is noteworthy that in the state of Virginia, such a measure has not been practiced for a long time, and Veronica knew about it. Trial and sentencing. Initially, the defendant refused the services of a lawyer and fully admitted her guilt, but then she abruptly changed her testimony and decided to use the help of a public defender. She later claimed that she heard voices ordering her to do this to her daughters, and she complied. Veronica also said that she had a harsh childhood, from which she remembered only beatings and hunger, and that her ex-husband had finally killed her belief that there was anything good waiting for her in life. She added that she did not want the same fate to befall her daughters. The trial took a long time because Veronica refused to leave her cell to attend the sessions. In addition, she attempted to commit suicide several times, but did so in such a way that she was saved each time and did not cause any serious harm to herself. The defense lawyer tried to convince the court that his client suffers from a mental disorder developed against the background of childhood traumas, the influence of a religious cult, and the abuse of her ex-husband. The defense lawyer also argued that Veronica was in an insane state at the time of the crime and did not realize her actions. But despite all the efforts of the lawyer, the court saw in the actions of the woman cold calculation, because she had purchased weapons in advance, fed the children sweets with sleeping pills, and then proceeded to implement her terrible plan. Her actions were not spontaneous. They could not be written off as a state of affect or a sharp aggravation of mental disorder. The final verdict in the case was handed down in March 2023. Veronica was found guilty and sentenced to 78 years in prison. In fact, this term will be a life sentence for her. It is worth noting that many people found Ronald's behavior in court strange. He did not look like a grief-stricken father, and when his former wife, sobbing, testified, he smirked. After the verdict, he only remarked that he was quite happy with the outcome. With the development of information technology, comments have come into human life. Every minute, people all over the world express their opinions in different ways. Someone leaves a comment on a post or a photo. Others share their impressions of a movie or a book. Comments on different kinds of services are especially popular. You have probably encountered them or written them yourself. This mainly concerns the sphere of cosmetology, hairdressing, construction, trade, medicine, and so on. Thanks to the comments, it is easy to understand the specifics of the work, its quality. Another criminal story will surprise you in many ways. In it, senselessness borders on madness. However, you will be surprised even more when you learn that the customer of the crime left a positive feedback for the completed work on the internet. This reaction was a fatal mistake for him and shed light on the investigation. Finding: March 12, 2020, the outskirts of Nashville, Tennessee, USA. The bodies of 33-year-old Holly Williams and her ex-boyfriend, 36-year-old William Lanway, were found in a white 2005 Acura sedan. The unexpected find was discovered by a random passerby, a construction worker who was working nearby. The man contacted emergency services and told them what he had seen. When the emergency team arrived on the scene, it turned out that the couple had been shot. No one expected that the 3-year investigation would uncover a number of secrets and expose many vices. But most importantly, the criminals will be caught and severely punished, and their example will serve as a lesson for others. Holly Williams. Holly Ann Williams was born on January 14, 1987, in Nashville. Some friends characterized her as a modest and sweet girl. Others considered free-spirited and willful. Since childhood, the heroine of the story was interested in beautiful things and people. She was an aesthete and saw the beautiful in everything. Therefore, she dreamed of linking her future life with the beauty industry. It must be said that she succeeded in this. In the middle of 2017, Holly graduated from the Georgia Career Institute in Murfreesboro. And already in September of the same year, she received a cosmetologist's license. She later opened her own business called Shine Aesthetics. Her business specialized in makeup, grooming procedures, and eyelash extensions. The girl herself was the face of her salon, beautiful, well-groomed, and personable. Her friend told me that she was really good at what she did. Holly had a lot of admirers, but she chose an eccentric guy named William Lanway. Their relationship was of an amplitude nature. William fell in love with her like a boy, beautifully courted. However, Broad gestures of love alternated with jealousy and scandals. As it turned out later, William was a skilled manipulator who knew how to properly apologize and continue the emotional swing further. He resorted to standard techniques, asked for forgiveness, gave gifts and flowers, promised to change. The girl returned to the toxic relationship again and again. The very unstable behavior of the boyfriend could be explained by a difficult childhood and traumas received in the first marriage. However, this does not justify his actions in later life. Bill Lanaway. William Lanaway, better known as Bill, was born on March 17, 1983, in Clarksville, Montgomery County, Tennessee. The boy spent his first years in the love of his mother and the rest of his relatives. Later, however, a terrible tragedy occurred. At the age of 26, Candy Kay, William's mother, died. At that time, he was 3.5 years old. It is known that her husband, who stabbed his wife almost in front of his son, was responsible for the young woman's untimely departure. Before that, Lyle Lanaway threatened to shoot himself and William if his mother did not return on time from the store. Perhaps the man had mental problems or was violently jealous of his wife and lost control of himself. Either way, this event left an indelible mark on Bill. Subsequently, his upbringing was taken up by the closest relatives. He grew up with proper care and protection. In 20 years, the young man married Dana Rucker. 3 years later, the spouses had a long-awaited daughter. Madison Kay did not know the misfortune that her father experienced. Parents loved the little girl, cherished and pampered. However, and this time, fate was merciless. The girl fell seriously ill. She was diagnosed with brain cancer. Unfortunately, the treatment was ineffective, and September 21, 2011, the baby became an angel. Chetta Lanaway could not recover from grief. Gradually, the relationship between the spouses broke down, and they decided to divorce. For a long time, Billy was depressed, withdrawn. However, life went on further, and he needed to accept reality. In everyday life, the man behaved shyly, tried not to show his feelings. However, sometimes he had nervous breakdowns and outbursts of aggression. Billy found an outlet in the work of a mechanic. Friends remembered that pulled him out of a depressed state for a long time, and finally, his new girlfriend did. The vicissitudes of love. At one point, life smiled at Bill. He met Holly Williams. It is worth noting that the character of the man contributed to this. When he visited parties or bars, he became cheerful and sociable. Young people liked each other and quickly began to meet. Everything was good. The lovers spent a lot of time together. However, later their relationship lost its former ease. Bill repeatedly provoked quarrels and raised his hand against his girlfriend. When she realized that it was time to leave, Bill began to manipulate the situation with his daughter from his past. Because of this, the young woman did not leave him, tried to support him. But all patience comes to an end. Holly's desire to break the harmful passion even more provoked Bill. All controversial moments he solved with his fists. Holly was worried for her life. One day after another, conflict occurred. That was the last straw. When Williams returned from work, she found her favorite dog without signs of life. Until that moment, the health of the pet was not in doubt. Therefore, despite the fact that the boyfriend denied his involvement, she decided that it was his doing. Thus, he took revenge on her and threatened her for the future. After that, the young people finally parted. Nevertheless, Bill did not leave her alone, calling and stalking her. On one such day between them, there was another altercation which ended in a showdown in the police. Bill was arrested for aggravated assault as well as kidnapping. Holly got a restraining order against him. However, just a week later, the two were found dead. An accident or a double murder? To a random eyewitness who called the emergency services, it seemed that the car found was involved in a traffic accident. The vehicle was at a construction site in the southwest part of the city. It had apparently rolled onto the curb and hit a tree. The reporting party believed that the people inside were injured in the accident. However, that was not what actually happened. Police noted that the man and woman were in the back seat in an unnatural position. In addition, the couple had gunshot wounds. The marks that were found in the passenger compartment were uncharacteristic of a typical impact in a collision. Also, the victims had no identification or personal belongings on them. When the victims were identified, it came as a surprise to law enforcement officers that they were dealing with a couple that had recently been in police reports. Versions. The first theory put forward by detectives was a crime of passion. It was assumed that Bill killed Holly and then ended his life. However, soon, this version was excluded. When communicating with the close entourage of the couple, confirmed that in recent months, the relationship between them was really heated. Holly even installed reinforced locks and CCTV cameras in the house. When reviewing the footage, it was found that Bill had come to her house more than once, wandering around looking for something. But what he was doing it for was unclear. However, such behavior spoke of the man's fixation and unwillingness to let go of the past. Later found witnesses who claimed that they saw the couple in the evening of March 11th calmly talking to each other. No aggression. At the same time, Bill was not noted. Perhaps their relationship was experiencing a new round, or they decided to keep friendly communication. In any case, the initial assumption of the investigators was dispelled. No murder weapon was found during the examination of the vehicle. If the man killed the woman and then committed suicide, where did the gun go? At the same time, the forensic results established that Bill could not have inflicted such wounds on himself, and every bullet fired was fatal. It looked like someone who knew how to handle firearms was at work. Things like cell phone, documents, and money were found in everyone's house, which means their trip wasn't a long or planned one. Holly and Bill may have been victims of kidnapping and murder. One thing is clear: they were murdered, then stuffed inside the car, and then pushed off the side of the road. A third person wanted to stage the accident to cover up another crime, but he didn't do it properly, maybe in a hurry. At the same time, no evidence or fingerprints were found in the car. The investigation suggested another version of what happened was revenge. After the detectives talked to the relatives of the victims, it turned out that because of the fiery temper, Bill has not once got into trouble. It's possible that he had ill-wishers and enemies, and his behavior could have provoked someone to retaliate. But even that hardly explained the death of his ex-girlfriend. She was the complete opposite, calm and peaceful, but at the same time could have been an unwanted witness to something. Investigation. In search of the perpetrator, recent contacts of the victims were studied. The contents of mobile devices and laptops were analyzed. Curious information came to light. The same number was listed in the messengers of both. However, it was not possible to check it at once, which only heightened suspicions. Such numbers are usually used to conceal identity and are often associated with bad purposes. However, this method is not 100% secret, because it leaves a trace that can be detected by an experienced programmer. To identify the owner of the number, the authorities had to turn to the specialists of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In parallel, there was a study of CCTV footage from Holly's house. It turned out that shortly before the tragic events, 3 unknown men broke into her home. All were thoroughly prepared, dressed in black clothes, faces hidden under a mask. It was unclear what they were looking for, as they did not take anything with them. It is worth noting that there were many valuable things in the woman's house. The intruders carefully examined the house, studied it. When they found one of the cameras, they tried to disconnect it. However, apparently they were not afraid of being caught and were confident in their impunity. After they left, Holly returned from work. She noticed the stranger's presence and became very frightened. She barricaded the doors overnight and changed the lock the next day. Poor thing was trying to protect herself. But from whom? And for what reason? Detectives had doubts about the woman's identity. Perhaps her fears were unfounded and she was being threatened. However, what could Holly be involved in? Detectives decided to delve into her line of work and discovered the following. Layla Love. The beauty parlor wasn't Holly's only source of income. No, she was not engaged in substance trafficking or smuggling. From the age of 18, the girl worked part-time as an escort. It was there that she earned a lot of money, as she served VIP clients, and personal business was used as a hobby, as well as a cover and concealment of income. In the intimate sphere, Holly was known as Layla Love and dealt only with wealthy men. Others couldn't afford her. Holly's duties included different services, escorting to events, massage, striptease, or passionate night. It must be said that she had quite a large client base. Her bright appearance attracted men, and they were ready to do anything for the time spent with her next to her. During this period, she earned a large sum and ensured a trouble-free life. At the same time, gained a lot of envious people, persecutors, and enemies. The fact is that the woman did not particularly hide her second profession. Of course, she did not shout about it at every turn, but her close friends, as well as Bill, knew about it. It turned out that at the beginning of the relationship, she honestly confessed everything to Lanaway. Because of her large income, she did not want to stop working and considered it a mere formality. However, it wasn't. Her occupation could turn against her and attract dangerous clients. It was quite possible that the men who broke into her house were related to this. The CCTV images of the men were later released to the public, but due to the poor quality of the images, their release was not positive. First suspect. Clarification in the investigation came after the wanted subscriber was identified. He turned out to be a 30-year-old resident of North Carolina named Adam Carey. It turned out that the man is a former military man with special training, was convicted, currently working in a private security organization. In fact, he was a real mercenary and a killing machine. Remarkably, Adam's photo matched the man's face that Holly's camera captured. Detectives got into his background and found out that he's a pretty nasty character. He had previously served a 4-month sentence for impersonating a police officer. During the search in his apartment were found weapons, silencers, and telescopic sights, components of explosives, flashbang grenades. Curiously, he got off with a laughable sentence for possession of such a large amount of dangerous weapons, which means he had strong support and protection. It took investigators a lot of work to figure out the connection between Holly, her ex-boyfriend, and the mercenary. Since Adam was proficient in all kinds of weapons and fighting techniques, his job was to carry out serious assignments and guard dignitaries. After he came to the attention of the police, it was decided to bring the man in for questioning. For a long time, they could not get anything substantial out of him. Eventually, he was detained and given time to think about the situation. In the meantime, the investigators turned their attention to another figure who had surfaced as a result of examining the victim's contacts. There was someone else of interest among them. Lovers. Holly's hot fan turned out to be Eric Charles Mond, owner of Mond Toyota car dealership out of Austin, Texas. All in all, quite a famous person. For everyone around him, Mr. Mond was a model family man and father. In fact, he had weaknesses peculiar to many men, extramarital affairs on the side. The businessman often came to Nashville to visit his son, studying at a local college. At the same time, he was satisfying his secret desires. One day he met Holly, who impressed him with her appearance. They began to see each other periodically. On February 3, 2020, Eric, using an alias, contacted Holly by email. He said that he would soon be in town and hoped to meet him. A few days later, he again reminded me of himself. The next letter said, "Good morning, beautiful. I'm looking forward to today. I'm in Nashville. I'll meet you at the bar like last time. Text me when you get there." Apparently, the date went as arranged. However, on March 1st, he received several threatening messages. The unknown person blackmailed him that if he did not receive $25,000 for his silence, he would tell his wife about the secret connection, ruin his reputation and family. Naturally, this state of affairs did not suit the man, except he didn't realize who was really behind the correspondence. A private security agency. It is known that after that, Eric Charles Mond turned to his 47-year-old acquaintance, whose name was Gilad Peled. Gilad was consulting for a dealership to solve the parking lot homelessness problem and had a private security agency where, by a strange coincidence, the arrested Adam Carey worked. All that is known about the owner of the firm is that he organized his business after returning to Texas from Israel, where he had been living for some time. However, his company was not going through the best of times. The reason for this was the fact that the citizens of Texas have the ability to defend themselves independently and carry weapons. Despite this, there were still orders, but the security services were not very popular. Therefore, when Gilead was approached by Eric, the owner of the company was happy to get such a well-known and profitable client. A few weeks later, just after the murder of Holly and Bill, Eric left a positive comment on the site where private security companies are registered. At first glance, his comment contained nothing unusual. Eric praised the work done by Gilad's staff and was pleased with the result. There seemed to be a real breakthrough in the investigation. There was a connection between the murdered men, the suspect, and the wealthy businessman. The only thing left to do was to get Adam to talk and unravel this tangle of secrets. Mercenaries. The detectives warned Adam Carey that keeping quiet was useless. It would only get worse. Slowly, he began to talk and explained that Eric Mond had been outed to his boss. Eric complained of harassment and extortion, suspected his mistress, and asked him to look into it. For these purposes, Gilad Peled turned to Adam and his 46-year-old partner, Brian Brockway from Austin. The latter also happened to be an ex-military infantryman capable of performing combat missions. Initially, they were required to find out the sender of the messages and intimidate him. Adam reported everything to Gilad, as evidenced by the discovered progress report, which resembled mostly military reports. The surveillance revealed that the man who had threatened the customer was Bill Lanaway. Holly had no idea what was going on behind her back. After the breakup, the former boyfriend was very angry and decided to set her up, and at the same time to get rich. He found out about the relationship between Holly and Eric Mond and started texting him under an assumed name. When the truth came out, the monitors reported everything to the management. However, their mission was soon adjusted. Among the instructions was to silence unwanted witnesses to the affair by any means necessary. Eric Mond was terrified because after it became clear that the extortionist is Bill Lanaway, Bill again claimed to be the one. On March 11th, Eric's house received a phone call. If his wife picked up the phone, his secret would be revealed, and the most famous family in Austin would be ruined. Gilad proposed to the customer of his services to deal with the stalker and at the same time to deal with the girl according to the laws of Hollywood action movies. He agreed and offered $750,000 for the job. Holly and Bill's days were numbered. Order. On March 12th, 2020, Holly and her ex-boyfriend were seen leaving the house together. The couple then proceeded to the parking lot and got into a car. Apparently, they decided to drive somewhere for a while, as they did not bring any belongings with them. Since the young people were being followed, they were quickly intercepted by an armed Adam and Brian. Bill and Holly were kidnapped. Their vehicle was then moved to a construction site on Old Hickory Boulevard. They were shot at the site, after which they left their bodies in the car and dumped down an embankment. In the hours that followed, the mercenaries worked to remove evidence and connections to the crime. They also recovered the car they had rented for the monstrous mission. After the deed was done, the trio dispersed in different directions. The order was fulfilled, however. The mercenaries left a legacy. Eric Mond had set himself up and clearly rushed to a positive review. Arrests. After Adam Carey, Brian Brockway, and Gilad Peled were arrested, the detectives went on the sly. They wanted to catch the customer red-handed, so they asked one of them to contact him and make up a story. Gilad called Eric and said that one of his partners learned about what had happened and demanded to enter the share. The head of the security agency offered to get rid of him, the same way he had done with Holly and Bill. Despite the fact that Eric Mond was very angry, He agreed to commit another massacre. He didn't care how many people died. The main thing for him was to keep the secret and feel safe. On December 10th, 2021, the famous businessman was detained. All four were charged with contract murder. Of all the accused, only Eric repented of what he had done. The rest of the mercenaries did not express the slightest regret. Before Gilad and Brian were arrested, they had been bugged. The men joked that the couple killed got off easy. During the interrogations, the customer tried to turn the tables on the perpetrators. Allegedly, they misunderstood the task, and he only wanted to get the extortionist out and scare. However, when the detectives presented evidence of his involvement in the crime, he confessed to everything and confirmed the criminal conspiracy. Justice. In November 2023, court hearings began and lasted 2 weeks. It was established that the Black Plot took place in early March 2020. Transactions between the defendants proved the withdrawals and transfers of money. On March 5th, Eric paid Gilad $15,000 as an advance payment. The manager of the security company was responsible for each employee's bank account. On March 9th, Holly and Bill were placed under surveillance. 3 days later, Mond wired another $150,000. This became a kind of signal to start the operation. After the order was completed, the participants in the crime received the balance. Cumulatively, in March 2023, $750,000 came from the famous car dealer. It took the jury 7 hours to reach a verdict. On November 17, Brian and Adam were found guilty of contract murder resulting in death, as well as conspiracy to commit kidnapping and kidnapping resulting in death. Held was also found guilty of the charges. Prior to trial, he entered into a plea agreement against his co-defendants. On November 30th of the same year, justice also caught up with Eric Mond. He was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder for hire, but not guilty of kidnapping resulting in death. All the defendants were sentenced to life in prison without parole. It is known that the businessman's defense team was going to appeal the remaining charge of the trial for which the conviction was handed down. After the hearing, the prosecutor's office said it was satisfied with the punishment the court had chosen. The detective who led the investigation said there was finally relief that the perpetrators had been caught, were able to stand trial and be fairly punished. However, that won't fill the void left for the victims' families. Their families did not deserve this tragedy, and Holly and Bill did not deserve to be killed, he said. Afterward. Unfortunately, this crime is proof of how unpredictable and tragic life can be. In fact, Holly was an innocent victim in the schemes of her ex-boyfriend and a conspiracy of dangerous people. Forbidden passion is punishable, and dirty money has a retroactive effect. As for Bill, despite his misdemeanor, he also did not deserve the punishment he received. Curiously, with his actions he framed not only his ex-girlfriend, but also himself. In March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit the United States. The entire world began to shut down, and people were gripped with shock and fear of an unknown disease. On March 23rd, 12-year-old daughter Gretchen Anthony, who was visiting her father at the time, received a text message from her mother. "Good morning. I have tested positive for the coronavirus. That means I will have to stay home for at least 2 weeks." "Okay, I really hope you feel better," Ava replied. Shortly thereafter, the mom stopped sharing the location of her phone with her daughter. Over the next 3 days, friends and family members received several text messages describing Gretchen's deteriorating condition. What was strange was that no one could reach the 51-year-old woman. She didn't even call her beloved young daughter, which was very unlike a loving mom. Those close to her began to suspect a scenario far worse than even an acute case of COVID-19. Someone else was sending messages from Gretchen's phone to cover up her disappearance. The police got involved, and soon it became clear to investigators looking for Gretchen that someone was indeed using the pandemic to cover up the woman's disappearance. Gretchen was born on January 8, 1969, in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. She spent most of her life up north, attending fashion school in New York City before moving to New Jersey, where she eventually became a teacher. In 2006, the blue-eyed blonde moved to Jupiter, the northernmost city in Palm Beach County, Florida. After working in the county's private schools for 8 years, Gretchen decided to try something new and took a job in the Human Resources Department of Viking Utility, an electrical contractor. The position allowed her to interact with new people, which Gretchen enjoyed. She considered the workforce her second family. Her first marriage didn't work out, but the former spouses remained on good terms and continued to raise their beloved daughter with shared custody. Gretchen led an active lifestyle and spent a lot of time in sports. It was through sports that she met David Anthony. Charismatic, able to charm David, who was 7 years younger than Gretchen, first became her personal trainer and then her second husband. Women from all over the county came to see the young, muscular trainer. David was a star in the gym and was very popular, attracting many new students. Gretchen fell in love. The romance developed rapidly. After a brief engagement, the couple got married at the Eldest Chapel in Las Vegas. So in 2015, Gretchen Stoughton Crane became Gretchen Stoughton Anthony and found, in her opinion, the husband of her dreams. Gretchen's daughter adored her stepfather and even called him Bonus Dad. In total, the couple lived in marriage for 5 years. However, the relationship that began with magic and perfect happiness gradually turned into a woman's fear for her safety. When tragedy struck, police and later journalists began to inquire about the identity of the second spouse. They were in for a lot of surprises. As it turned out, David Ethan Anthony was originally known as David Anthony Deutsch, and then later changed his name. David Anthony Deutsch, a star college basketball player, was arrested in 1997 for robbing a Blockbuster video store with a water pistol and assaulting a police officer. In each case, he took a plea bargain and spent some time in jail. Growing up without a father in Palm Beach Gardens, David spent much of his childhood and adolescence alone. He didn't talk much, was withdrawn, had low self-esteem, and was bullied at school for being overweight. He wasn't even allowed to join a recreational sports league because he was so much larger than all the other kids. Not surprisingly, as a teenager, David struggled with severe depression and developed symptoms that his family believed were consistent with bipolar disorder. However, he refused to take any medication, devoted himself fanatically to sports, and really excelled at it. After high school, David received a scholarship to play college basketball and became a star on the team. He idolized basketball greats and even named his husky Kobe after his favorite basketball player, Kobe Bryant. On January 26, 2020, the idol will die in a helicopter crash, and this event will be another reason for David's unstable behavior. In the meantime, the smart, attractive coach ignores mental problems, bathes in deserved popularity, and becomes the husband of Gretchen. The couple lead an active lifestyle. David enjoys bicycling, deep-sea fishing, and kayaking. Gretchen works out hard at the gym, goes to the beach, kayaks, and does yoga. Unfortunately, only the first 2 years of marriage will prove to be happy. The remaining 3 years, the smiling blonde will spend trying to leave. Gretchen admitted to friends that her husband's behavior was becoming more and more manic, and at times he insulted her. They once even broke up for at least 6 months but got back together. Tabitha Hopkins, David's former boss at the gym, later recalled noticing strange mood swings in David. In 2017, things got so bad that Tabitha was forced to fire him for his aggressive behavior, especially towards women. David was indeed behaving very strangely and was unwilling to seek help. The man became obsessed with the end of the world and loaded 3 large bags of rice, several pots, pans, and 10 pairs of shoes into his truck in 2018. His family believed this episode was a symptom of bipolar and manic-depressive disorder. Bad periods were followed by good ones in which David tried to do something about his behavior. He even managed to get Tabitha Hopkins to give him his job back by assuring the gym owner that he was trying to be a better person and attending self-improvement seminars. Tabitha softened. There was no denying David's effectiveness as a trainer. The clients were delighted with him. Over time, as the mental illness continued untreated, David's condition worsened. Gretchen recognized that her husband had problems and shared this with friends. Sometimes, she said, she would lock herself in their bedroom just to increase the distance between them. "I noticed this crazy look in his eyes," she texted a friend, Dawn, one morning in late December. David was gaining momentum, and the spouse didn't know what he was capable of. "I'm watching him on the cameras and waiting for him to go to bed," Gretchen wrote another evening. Then I'll go downstairs, get a knife, and put it under my pillow, just in case, and hopefully sleep. That same year, on Christmas Eve, Gretchen couldn't find her personal belongings. She searched the house, looked in David's backpack, and found her wedding ring, passport, driver's license, credit cards, and some money. The incident so disturbed Gretchen that she texted Don, her boss and friend, that she was afraid of her own husband. By the end of the month, Gretchen made the decision to end the tumultuous relationship. In December 2019, she forced David to move out of the townhouse to her mother's house, who lived nearby, and changed the locks. It was during this time that David's colleagues noticed a gradual change in his behavior. Most of the time, the trainer was one of the first to arrive at the gym, but after the events in the family, he began to come later and later, seemed more and more withdrawn and sullen. On January 26th, Kobe Bryant, David's idol, dies. When Kobe Bryant passed away, something happened, Tabitha recalls. You'd think David and Kobe Bryant were best friends. He was traumatized by it. In the days that followed, David was hysterical, crying and wailing in front of the fitness club groups he led and refusing to go home. Despite his emotionally fragile state, David took an active role in a controversial self-improvement program called gratitude training, which critics likened to a cult. He spent thousands of dollars on seminars, but refused to tell his family what he was doing during the sessions. David's behavior regressed. On February 24th, he failed to show up for work. When Tabitha tried to find out if he was okay, he attacked her, and the supervisor made the decision to terminate the employee permanently. This time, Tabitha caught a glimpse of David's frightening rage and was truly frightened. Hopkins texted Gretchen about the incident and asked her to be careful. "That's the last time I talked to Gretchen," she would later say. 4 days later, on February 28, 2020, just weeks before her disappearance, Gretchen files for divorce. David's stability is rapidly going downhill, and he is becoming increasingly hostile. On March 7th, the woman David had begun dating booked a seat at an unusual art class. They were to drink wine and draw pictures under the guidance of the instructor. However, the evening did not go according to plan. When David wished to hug his companion during the class and she rejected the attempt, he jumped up, yelled at her in the middle of the class, and ran outside. David's behavior frightened the young woman, and she decided not to continue the interaction, telling him that he could not stay with her tonight. When they got to the house where David had left his truck, it became clear that David had different ideas about the matter. David, whom she'd only known for a month, had decided to move in with her. Duffel bags filled with men's clothes were spread out on her bed and dining room table, and food from his mother's house was stashed in the freezer. Kobe, David's husky, was running around in the backyard. David left only after a new friend called her neighborhood security company. When Gretchen went missing, her family told investigators that David was returning to her home after he left. The young woman was concerned for her safety and installed surveillance cameras throughout the house and garage. On March 11th, the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. A few days later, David, believing the pandemic to be an end-of-the-world prophecy, showed up at Gretchen's house in the early morning hours. He believed the world was coming to an end and walked around the windows trying to convince his almost ex-wife to go with him to Costa Rica, where he thought they could escape the virus. After a few hours, Gretchen relented and allowed David into the house. That evening, a patrolling police officer noticed David, visibly nervous and sweaty, strutting around outside a Riviera Beach restaurant and at one point approaching a group of teenage girls. The officer noticed David's license plate, partially covered with black duct tape, and headed toward him. David claimed that his 12-year-old stepdaughter had taped the license plate and began to act even more nervous. The man ignored the police officer's orders not to move, yanked open the door of his truck, and began searching for something under the seat. Fearing what would happen next, the officer pointed a gun at David and ordered him to the ground. When the officers looked under the driver's seat where David was trying to reach, they found a large knife. David was arrested for resisting arrest, but posted bail a few days later and was released. The pandemic was gaining momentum. In the early 20s of March, some states began banning people from leaving their homes. Gretchen, like everyone else, was trying to figure out how to live in the new realities. She shared informational videos about the virus and how to stay safe, posting memes and jokes mocking the absurdity of the new normal. On Thursday, March 19th, she posted a quote from a meditation blog. "When there is chaos around you, the wisest choice is to create peace within yourself." After that, her profile was no longer active, and she stopped answering calls and messages. This moment divided life into before and after for all of her near and dear ones. Texting from Gretchen Anthony's phone to friends and family began on March 23, 2020. Over the course of several days, friends and family received a series of messages from Gretchen stating that she was quarantined at home, then describing her deteriorating condition and hospitalization in the emergency room at Jupiter Medical Center. Another message claimed she was transferred to another CDC facility that did not exist. On March 24th, Don Paris, Gretchen's supervisor and friend, received a message from her saying, "I tested positive for coronavirus early this morning. This is bad news, but I am at a coronavirus CDC treatment center that only handles COVID cases. The good news is that my blood type can potentially be used in treatment. I'm not sure if you remember when I said I have a strain of mad cow disease in my blood. Well, that strain is important for gathering more answers and finding a cure. For safety reasons, Dr. Sinclair and her team strongly encourage program participants to keep contact only with immediate family members. I chose my mom. Gretchen's ex-husband, who had his 12-year-old stepdaughter visiting, also began receiving messages from Gretchen saying that the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, had quarantined her. She could be placed in a medically induced coma, and she would no longer be able to write." Jeff Dreyer didn't believe these reports. He was confused by the multiple text errors and abbreviations. The manner of speech in the messages sounded more like David Anthony, and Jeff became alarmed. In addition, it bothered everyone who received these messages that no one, not even his daughter Gretchen, never called. Friends couldn't imagine Gretchen dying of anything, since at 51 she was in good shape and took her health very seriously. When calls to the medical center confirmed that Gretchen Anthony had not been admitted there, the family along with friends decided to contact the police to check if their loved one was doing well. Gretchen Anthony's boss told police that she was last at work on March 20th, and when he called her insurance company to see if she was receiving medical care anywhere, they said there had been no referrals under her policy to process treatment. Jupiter Police Detective Jared Kennerson contacted Jupiter Medical Center and found that the hospital's records did not mention anything about such a patient. In fact, police found that Gretchen had not been to Jupiter Medical Center since 2008. Police checked the medical center parking lot and found a Mini Cooper in the parking lot. In the car, Gretchen's purse was lying in the most visible spot, causing patrol officers to become concerned. Officers went to the missing person's home. What they discovered at Gretchen's home was alarming and turned a simple visit into a potential murder investigation. A neighbor approached the officers and gave them the disturbing information. "Early Saturday morning on Saturday, March 21st, I heard a very desperate female screaming as if she was being attacked. And then I heard her scream, 'No!' And then I heard something like, 'It hurts, stop.' The scream was really serious." Unfortunately, Gretchen didn't call emergency services. Some people are just wary of calling the police. Officers became even more concerned when another neighbor told them he later noticed a soapy substance leaking from under Gretchen's garage door. The front door leading to the garage was locked, and the key was broken in the deadbolt. When officers were able to open the door, they detected a strong, pungent odor of cleaning product in the garage. Using body cameras, patrol officers searched the house several times. They found evidence of a violent struggle, a broken picture frame, shards of glass on Gretchen's bed, and a soiled towel. Officers noticed that surveillance cameras inside the house had been removed from the walls, possibly to destroy compromising evidence, and sent a request to a service provider to recover the footage from the cloud. Police officials made inquiries and discovered that a neighbor had taken a photo of a black Nissan pickup truck parked outside Gretchen's home after the terrifying screams. The exact same pickup truck was owned by Gretchen's almost ex-husband, David Anthony, who suddenly decided to leave. His mother told police that her son packed up his truck and hit the road on Tuesday, March 24, 2020, saying he was going to Costa Rica. Their suspicions were heightened when they saw on video taken in the parking lot of Jupiter Medical Center, where Gretchen's car was found, a Mini Cooper pull into a parking space, and a tall figure, the height of David Anthony, emerge from the vehicle. Investigators began tracking Gretchen's cell phone and found that it was registered in the Pensacola, Florida area. As would later be confirmed, David had driven just 600 miles to Pensacola, Florida's westernmost city. After stopping at a couple of local pawn shops to sell some women's jewelry, he and his dog, Kobe, continued west, stopping for one night at a hotel in Pecos, Texas, before settling in Las Cruces, New Mexico. While 2,000 miles away, David contacted detectives and reported that Gretchen was alive and in no danger. He explained that his spouse had provided him with a written statement, which he read aloud over the phone. According to the statement, Gretchen discovered financial crimes at her job and fled Florida with David, fearing for her life. The statement also said she also fled from her first ex-husband, Jeff. Detectives didn't believe it and continued to investigate. They tracked Gretchen and David's cell phone signals, which indicated that the two phones were together. Expecting the worst, detectives obtained a warrant to impound the truck on March 29th and enlisted the help of Las Cruces police to arrange a traffic stop. Las Cruces police detained David, seized the truck and property, including his phone and Gretchen's phone, but they still didn't have enough evidence to call him in for questioning. He was allowed to just walk away. On March 30th, 2020, Jupiter police obtained electronic records from Gretchen's home, and investigators finally learned the truth. On the morning of March 21st, David lurked silently on the porch overlooking the back of the garage. In his hands, he held an elongated object. 6 minutes later, Gretchen appeared in the footage. The video shows David forcibly driving her into the garage, and a scream can be heard over the footage. First, Gretchen yelled to the Amazon Alexa device in the garage, "Alexa, turn on the lights in the garage." The surveillance camera audio then captured a muffled thud and Gretchen's muffled screams. She then yelled to Alexa again, "Alexa, call 911. Gretchen didn't know that unless she specifically programmed her smart speaker to call 911, the device wouldn't call the police in an emergency. After a while, David's face appeared in the frame, his hands wearing gloves. In one shot, Gretchen's bloody head could be seen as he walked around the garage. Investigators have seen enough. On March 30th, detectives get a warrant for David's arrest. Gretchen's case went from being a missing persons case to a murder investigation. Detective Kennerson rushed to Las Cruces. Shortly before midnight, March 31st, police arrested David outside a convenience store. Jupiter detectives questioned him at the state police headquarters in Las Cruces, New Mexico. They had one goal, to get David to reveal the whereabouts of Gretchen's body, and the detectives failed. David claimed that Gretchen was alive. In fact, during the interrogation, David Anthony made this claim 35 times. Detectives even tried using a voice recording of Gretchen's daughter, whom David really loved. With her father's permission, the girl recorded her request. "David, it's Ava. I love you. I'm scared. I miss my mom," she told him. "I need to know where my mom is. Please do the right thing and tell me where my mom is. Please. I love you." Detectives played the tape to David, but he remained indifferent. While behind bars, he refused to say anything about what had happened to Gretchen. In his typical restraint, he remained silent for months. David knew it would be difficult for the prosecutor to get a conviction without Gretchen's body. He was charged with second-degree murder and extradited to Florida. While David was in custody in Palm Beach County, Florida, a grand jury indicted him for kidnapping and upgraded the murder charge from second-degree to first-degree murder. This was a turning point, and in December 2020, after 8 months in prison, the criminal took a plea deal with the prosecutor. The fact is that he could have faced the death penalty for first-degree murder. Under the terms of the deal, David would plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a 38-year prison sentence. The main condition of the deal was that he would lead investigators to Gretchen's body. On December 21st, 9 months after Gretchen Anthony disappeared, David Anthony admitted what everyone already knew. He killed his wife. Gretchen's body was found wrapped in a blanket 3 miles from her home, in the woods behind a Walmart store and near a nursing home. Investigators determined she died from stab wounds to her neck and torso. There were several defensive wounds. She was fighting for her life. At the sentencing hearing, David Anthony said the COVID-19 pandemic was a contributing factor to his crime because he saw the pandemic as Armageddon from which he had to flee. My delusions saw the COVID pandemic as a prophecy of the end of the world, an Armageddon that I felt compelled to avoid at all costs. Under the terms of the plea agreement, David Anthony was sentenced to 38 years in prison on January 14, 2021. He is currently serving his sentence at the Martin Correctional Institution in Florida. At the mercy of the elements. The world is such that accidents can happen anywhere. Even the simplest, most routine situation can turn disastrous. We take risks every day, yet naively believe we control everything. Some people intentionally invite risk into their lives. For some, it becomes a constant pursuit tied to their professional activities, while others occasionally seek a thrill. Extreme hobbies like skydiving, rock climbing, caving, parkour, and more fall into this category. Diving is also on the list of dangerous pastimes. The desire to explore the ocean depths is understandable. Water and its inhabitants have always attracted both researchers and ordinary people. The vastness of the water space, far larger than land, adds to its intrigue. Diving is one of the most popular activities, but it's not the safest. Many things can go wrong. Oxygen deprivation, barotrauma, encounters with dangerous animals or strong currents, and more. The most unexpected thing can happen. You could be forgotten during an underwater excursion. What may seem like a joke at first is actually a reality. The story of the Lonergan family is a tragic confirmation of this. Though the events occurred back in 1998, and many safety protocols have since been implemented to prevent such occurrences, this story still chills to the bone. Imagine the horror experienced by the two spouses left alone at sea. A quarter of a century has passed since then, yet many continue to debate what really happened to the couple. Was their disappearance the result of tragic negligence or a deliberate decision to end their lives? Let's try to figure this out together. The long-awaited dive. On January 25, 1998, Thomas and Eileen Lonergan left their hostel in the Australian town of Cairns. Leaving the northeastern part of Queensland behind, the young couple headed further north to Port Douglas. Their goal, a long-anticipated dive into the waters of the Great Barrier Reef. The world's largest coral reef system had long been a magnet for avid divers. At the designated location, the 33-year-old man and 28-year-old woman boarded the boat Outer Edge, along with other like-minded individuals. A total of 13 pairs set out that day to St. Crispin's Reef. The one-day excursion, costing around $100, was full of promise. The package included 3 dives in a picturesque and safe location, all under the supervision of an experienced crew. It's worth noting that the company providing underwater tourism services was considered one of the best and had years of experience, so travelers could pursue their dreams with peace of mind. The weather on January 25th was ideal for the tourists. By all accounts, it was a perfect day for scuba diving. The water at the dive site was pleasantly warm. From the start, the couple declined the services of guide Catherine Traverso, relying on their extensive experience. The Lonergans had completed 160 dives in their lifetime and were considered seasoned divers. The boat's passengers donned their gear and jumped into the coral sea. The diversity of flora and fauna was stunning. The Great Barrier Reef is home to around 1,500 species of fish and 400 types of coral. When the dive time was up, a signal sounded from the boat, clearly audible underwater, indicating it was time to surface. Afterward, everyone emerged and returned to the vessel. Around 3 p.m., the protagonists of this story took their third dive, descending to a depth of 39 feet. The underwater tour was coming to an end, and time flew by unnoticed. Within an hour, everyone was back on board. According to the crew, a head count was conducted, and the number of divers matched the original count, 26 people. That evening, the Outer Edge arrived in Port Douglas, but not all the divers disembarked. It turned out Several tourists were missing. However, what was more horrifying was that no one had noticed this. The same applied to the 2 bags that remained on board. To this day, it's unclear how the crew miscounted the passengers and failed to notice the belongings left behind. One way or another, the missing individuals were Thomas and Eileen Lonergan, together forever. Thomas and Eileen met while studying at Louisiana State University, where Eileen was learning the basics of scuba diving. They instantly liked each other and began dating. The couple was deeply in love and inseparable. They went camping, swam in the ocean, and attended parties together. Their relationship was admired by many and seemed ideal. Some even envied their genuine love. No matter what they did it together. Eileen had a great passion for diving. She spoke about it with such enthusiasm that Thomas couldn't resist and soon shared his beloved's interest. Over time, the young couple earned their certification in this field. Eventually, on June 24, 1988, they sealed their union in marriage. The wedding took place in Jefferson, Texas. Since both were born and raised in Louisiana and had never traveled abroad, they dreamed of seeing the world. Thomas and Eileen were also known for their kindness and compassion, so when they were offered the opportunity to join the Peace Corps, they eagerly agreed. The Lonergans were perfect candidates for this role. During their student years, they participated in numerous charity projects and events, offering help to those in need. The Peace Corps, an independent U.S. government agency, sends volunteers to assist struggling countries, promoting friendship and peace worldwide. After a successful internship in Tuvalu, a country in Polynesia, the couple moved on to Fiji, where they taught children from impoverished families. At the time of these events, they had been married for 10 years. By then, they had completed their mission and were planning to return to the U.S. However, the Lonergans had one more wish: a world cruise. They wanted to visit famous places and take in the local beauty. Their return home was scheduled for March 1999, but first, they had a long and exciting journey ahead: the Great Barrier Reef. As avid divers, the couple had long dreamed of seeing the wonders of the Great Barrier Reef. This is why they ended up in Australia. The local attraction is renowned worldwide. Did you know it's the largest coral reef system on the planet? Created by marine organisms, it's a truly unique natural marvel. Its area surpasses the size of some countries and is even visible from space. The Lonergans wanted to capture this wonder in their memories forever, knowing it might not last. You can't imagine how Thomas and Eileen saw it back in 1998. Today, much of the ecosystem has vanished. Once vibrant and diverse, the corals have become bleached. While not dead, they are at high risk of disappearing forever if they become diseased or are exposed to destructive external forces. Even a slight rise in water temperature can cause this. For optimal coral growth, water temperatures need to be between 72 and 81 degrees Fahrenheit. The beauty of the Great Barrier Reef can still be enjoyed today, but in the face of the greenhouse effect, its days are numbered. A significant coral bleaching event occurred in 1997 to 1998, which is why our couple was in such a hurry. They rushed to see the reef while it was still alive, only to encounter death instead. Criminal negligence. Based on general knowledge and film scenarios, we can imagine the scene that unfolded before the couple after they surfaced. An endless sea stretched around them, with no sign of the only symbol of safety: the outer edge boat. Two young people, without food or water, were left alone amidst the vast ocean. Surrounding them were threats in the form of dangerous sharks, the blazing sun, and the risk of dehydration. The desperate divers could only hope that their disappearance would be noticed and that they would be rescued in time. After all, according to the rules, the number of people on board must be counted multiple times, before the dive and after. Even if a miscount occurred, records should be made upon surfacing about the dive depth, air levels in the tanks, and so on. In short, the required documentation should have been kept. In the end, even if none of this had been done, the Lonergans' personal belongings remained on board, which surely couldn't have gone unnoticed. Initially, the couple likely thought it was a funny mistake, something they would laugh about later when telling their friends. But as the hours passed, nothing changed. 2 at sea. The realization of the inevitable came slowly. No one wants to believe in the worst until the very end. Over time, the forgotten couple began to assess their situation more clearly. In reality, Thomas and Eileen could do nothing. There was no one in sight, and calling for help was pointless. Swimming to shore was equally impossible. There were no islands nearby. Despite being experienced divers, it was unrealistic to cover the 60-mile distance to land. Adding to their fears was the fact that Australia is home to the largest and most vicious sharks in the world. It wouldn't take much for these predators to attack the stranded tourists and deal with them. The couple had no tools to defend themselves from this looming threat. Nor did they have any water or food with them. It is known that the average life expectancy without water is 2 to 4 days. For some, this period may stretch a few extra days. While a person can survive much longer without food, water is essential. Without it, dehydration sets in after 5 to 7 days. How long a person can endure without sustenance depends on their health, body mass, willpower, and the climate. Regardless, death under these conditions is slow and agonizing. On top of that, they faced scorching heat, increasing the likelihood of sunstroke or heat exhaustion. The only 2 comforting thoughts at that moment were these. First, they were not alone in this situation, but together, as they had always been. Second, as divers, they were unlikely to drown. Their gear included buoyancy compensators, which are much more reliable than life jackets. The next danger they faced came in the form of strong winds and powerful currents. They were being carried farther and farther away. Even if someone began searching for them after a while, they would no longer be in the same location. The most tragic aspect, however, was that there were pontoons just 1.5 to 2 miles away. These floating platforms, anchored to the ocean floor, provide a place to rest. Had the Lonergans known about this, things could have been very different. They could have waited for help in relative safety, resting, and even sleeping. But alas, a different fate awaited them. The couple was being swept into open waters, farther from any chance of rescue. With about 5 hours left until sunset, night, the most dangerous time, was approaching. For when everything sleeps, the sea comes alive. A chance at rescue. At this time, the 24 passengers of the Outer Edge and the crew had all disembarked. The exhausted tourists headed to their hotel rooms, and the boat's crew returned home to their families. No one gave a thought to anything being wrong. No one cared about the belongings left aboard. Everyone was simply tired after a busy day and eager for rest. The next day brought no significant changes. However, there was one moment that should have drawn attention. Another group of divers visited the Great Barrier Reef. The familiar boat pulled up to its usual spot, and the tourists descended into the water. Upon resurfacing, one of them told a crew member that they had noticed diving weights on the ocean floor. These weights, part of a diver's equipment, are used to counteract buoyancy. Most likely, the discovered gear belonged to Thomas and Eileen, who had detached them. But the crew member didn't take the information seriously, chalking it up as an interesting find. Yet such items don't simply lie around on the ocean floor for no reason. The negligent worker should have treated the discovery with the attention and caution it deserved. Unfortunately, another mistake and act of negligence occurred. Had an alarm been raised, perhaps the search for the missing couple would have started sooner, and they might have survived. The cruel irony of fate, waiting for help and fighting for your life while people and a boat are not far away. Sadly, this is often the case. Life and death walk side by side. 2 days later. On January 27th, during the cleaning of the boat, someone finally noticed the forgotten belongings. Curious to find out who they belonged to, the bag was opened, revealing dry clothes, a wallet, and documents in the names of Thomas and Eileen Lonergan. The crew remembered seeing the couple 2 days prior. During that time, no one had come to claim the items, which was quite strange. This is when things started to become clear. The skipper who made the discovery immediately reported everything to the police. The investigation began right away. Everyone understood the gravity of two tourists disappearing. Law enforcement officers checked the missing couple's hotel room. Unsurprisingly, there were no guests inside. The hotel staff confirmed they had seen the couple before their trip on Sunday morning. After that, they never returned. However, no one had raised any alarms since the room had been prepaid, and it was assumed their excursion could have lasted several days. Tension mounted. The police interviewed the Outer Edge crew as well as all the passengers from the past few days. It became apparent that no one had seen Thomas and Eileen for quite some time. Moreover, no one could recall if they had even come ashore. Each tourist had been busy with their own activities. The crew insisted that they had counted everyone before heading to shore, but perhaps they had counted the same couple twice. However, some tourists pointed out they hadn't noticed any counting at all, at least not out loud. The discovery of the weight belt was also mentioned. The search. Things were looking bad. To organize a large-scale search, the police called for triple reinforcements. 17 planes and 2 helicopters were dispatched. The Coast Guard, several private boats, and concerned citizens all joined the search effort. The area where the tourists had been left was scoured thoroughly. Over time, the search zone shifted. In 2 days, the current had carried the couple far away. Throughout all of this, Port Douglas was in an uproar. Everyone was shocked by the incident, holding out hope for a positive outcome. However, many understood that the chances of rescue after such a long period of inactivity were slim to none. The company that had organized the excursion realized the gravity of the situation and prepared to bear responsibility. The boat's crew knew they had been outrageously careless and negligent. Nothing could justify it. The large-scale search lasted 5 days. Continuing beyond that seemed pointless. By this time, anything could have happened to the couple. In the end, they could have died from dehydration or been attacked. The evidence. Supporting this, on February 5, 1998, a buoyancy compensator washed ashore near Indian Head, more than 100 miles north of Port Douglas. It was found to contain a tag with the name Thomas Lonergan. Interestingly, no bite marks from predators were found on it. This is when the case of the couple's disappearance became more convoluted. Shortly after, Eileen's wetsuit and a second buoyancy compensator presumed to be hers were also found. The wetsuit had cuts on it, leading some to suspect they were caused by shark teeth. However, if that had been the case, it's unlikely that anything would have been left of the suit. Later, forensic experts determined the tears were caused by coral. The wetsuit had even accumulated barnacles, indicating it had been in the water for quite some time. Forensic specialists suggested the wetsuit had been submerged since January 26th, the day after the described events. It's possible that, under the scorching sun and heat, combined with a lack of water, Eileen began experiencing delirium, causing her to remove her suit, which would have compromised her ability to stay afloat. Later, diving weights and oxygen tanks were found, some still containing air. However, none of the discovered items provided evidence of death caused by marine predators. What was clear was that the couple didn't have enough time for anyone to find them alive. On February 14th, the search for the missing couple was officially called off. 3 weeks is more than enough time for human bodies to be entirely consumed by the open ocean. According to all biological and anatomical principles, the Lonergans couldn't have survived unless they had been picked up by another boat. But if that were the case, they would have made contact. The last message. 6 months later, a diving slate belonging to the couple was found 160 miles from where the tourists had disappeared. This specialized slate is used for underwater communication and note-taking. Thanks to it, we now know how long Thomas and Eileen remained alive. On one side of the slate, the message read, Monday, January 26, 1998, 8 a.m. To anyone who can help us, we were left behind at Agincourt Reef on January 25, 1998 at 3 p.m. Please help us. Send assistance before we die. SOS. The couple realized they were on the verge of death and used every possible means to save themselves, even the smallest chance. On October 10, 1998, police officer Noel Noonan made an official statement. Authorities believed that the missing man and woman likely passed away between 8 a.m. on January 26th and February 2nd. Most likely, their death resulted from dehydration or drowning. After being exposed to the hot sun for an extended period without water, they became exhausted and disoriented. The divers voluntarily shed their heavy gear, which had been keeping them afloat. One thing was clear in this situation: they were unlikely to have been eaten. The couple's family members were devastated by the loss. Their deaths seemed senseless and avoidable. Thomas and Eileen were young, with their whole lives ahead of them. But the crew's negligence proved fatal. A professional company, which had maintained a good reputation for years, failed to follow basic safety protocols. Justice. When it came time to face justice, Jeffrey Nairn, captain of the Outer Edge, stood trial for manslaughter. He was responsible for ensuring safety on board. The defendant swore that he had instructed one of the crew members to perform a head count after the final dive, but the crew member made an unforgivable mistake. Allegedly, 2 tourists were counted twice because they had gone for a swim after surfacing. Thanks to the defense's efforts, the Australian Supreme Court acquitted the boat captain in 1999. The defense attorney presented entries from the couple's diaries, which suggested they had grown weary of life, having seen and experienced everything, and wanted to depart voluntarily while they were still young. The relatives of the missing couple argued that Thomas had likely been in a depressed state when he wrote those entries, but that didn't mean he would have taken such a drastic step. Moreover, the couple would never have put others at risk of legal trouble. They were members of the Peace Corps, known for their compassion and sense of responsibility. It was also revealed that Thomas's words had been taken out of context, but the case was not reopened on those grounds. As for the diving company, it suffered an inevitable collapse. Its reputation could not be restored. Following the court's ruling, a massive fine was imposed on the company. The financial burden was too great, and the management declared bankruptcy. Was this justice? One way or another, the beautiful couple could never be brought back. They had been left to face a horrific death in open waters. To this day, their bodies have not been found. Version 1. Perhaps the court's verdict was influenced by the speculation surrounding the missing couple. By the end of 1998, unexpected theories about what had happened began to surface in the media. It started to seem as if the tragic story had a secret motive, or perhaps the press was simply trying to create that illusion. One of the most popular theories was that it was a voluntary departure from life. The idea was that one spouse deprived the other of life, and then ended his own. This theory was seemingly supported by the personal diaries of the Lonergans. The claim was that their deaths were not due to negligence, but were part of a carefully planned act by Thomas and Eileen. In support of this, personal writings were cited. 6 months before the event, Thomas wrote, "Like a student who has passed an exam, I think my life is wonderful and I'm ready to die. From what I can tell, my life can only go downhill from here. I've reached my peak and everything is going down." Eileen's thoughts were no less alarming. It was believed that she knew of her husband's desires and was willing to share them. A few weeks before the underwater excursion to the Great Barrier Reef, she wrote, "Tom wants to die a sharp and clear death, and he wants it to happen soon. He's not prone to ending his own life, but he has the desire to die, and I can support him in that." The theory suggests that the couple may have chosen this unusual method because both loved diving. There was something almost mystical about the idea of dying in a place where coral reefs were slowly dying as well. However, the couple's relatives didn't agree with this version. They were convinced that Thomas and Eileen wanted to live, which is why they had planned a vacation after their long mission. In addition, they had recently talked about having children. While they hadn't rushed into parenthood before, they had come to the realization that life would be more joyful with a child. They wanted to continue their family line and pass down their knowledge. It also came to light that journalists had used the couple's diary entries without regard for context, presenting speculation as fact. The spouse's words were twisted and misinterpreted. Version 2. Others believe that the Lonergans' deaths were staged. American researchers Hugh Merchan and Audrey Lindock, who investigated the case, supported this theory. They believed that Thomas and Eileen intended for their diary entries to be found and published. After all, how else would they have ended up in the media? It was revealed that the couple had financial problems that could have resulted in long prison sentences. The theory is that the couple never intended to return home after their trip, choosing instead to escape punishment. It is possible they were picked up by another boat, which had been hired for this purpose. Additionally, there were reports from people claiming to have seen the missing couple. Given the story's notoriety, their faces were recognizable to many. Over the years, police received multiple reports from eyewitnesses who said they had seen the Lonergans alive and well. However, after investigation, these reports turned out to be false. Some were not taken seriously at all. It was also established that since their disappearance, the couple's bank accounts had remained untouched, despite containing substantial sums of money. Sad conclusion. Officially, Thomas and Eileen are still considered missing. Their story served as the basis for the film Open Water, made in 2003 by a married couple who spent about $120,000 bringing the real-life events to the screen. The film helps viewers understand what the couple may have felt in such a dire situation. Each viewer can put themselves in their shoes and feel the helplessness that a person experiences when faced with the elements and predatory animals. The film touches on human negligence in many ways. Even in the final scenes, when fishermen find a scuba camera inside a shark's stomach belonging to the couple, the focus is on their indifference. One of them says, "I wonder if this thing works." Yet no one questions how it got there or what happened to its owner. Just as the crew of The Outer Edge had been careless with their duties, failing to notice the couple's personal belongings left behind. If everyone had done their job properly, the tragedy could have been avoided. Despite the different theories, it's most likely that Thomas and Eileen met their end. They were doomed to a slow and agonizing death. The only positive outcome of this entire situation was the tightening of safety measures in diving operations and the mandatory name-by-name headcount of divers on boats. Terrible consequences, a monstrous lesson. The angry man walked out of the house, slamming the door hard. He reached the driveway and stopped. He ran his hand through his black, disheveled hair several times. The man was visibly nervous and said something quietly under his breath, then walked briskly back toward the house. He tugged sharply on the doorknob and stepped inside. Picking up a baseball bat that was lying at the entrance, he walked bossily through the house and shouted violently. At his screams, a blonde-haired young woman ran out. As soon as she approached him, he struck her on the head with the bat. The woman fell unconscious, and instantly a pool of blood formed on the floor around her. The enraged, dark-haired man continued to strike the immobilized woman until his fervor subsided. It is hard to imagine, but it happens that in such a paradisiacal place of the planet as New Zealand can happen such bloody tragedies. After all, New Zealand is first of all a picturesque nature with its unique flora and fauna, which creates a comfortable climate for people to live in. People living here have a high standard of living with a measured and calm way of life, where there is no corruption and crime is close to zero. But today our story will disrupt the tranquil life of Oakland and completely change the notion of a happy family. Carmen and Brad met on an ordinary day, which later became a fateful day for the two of them. Carmen Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987 in South Africa. Her father died when the girl was only 10 years old. Heavily bearing the loss, her family moved to relatives in the town of Whitby in the United Kingdom. But in another country, the long-awaited peace never came, and after a while her family moved back to South Africa. Carmen, who was over 18 years old at the time, decided to stay with her relatives and later moved to live in London. In London, Carmen completed her studies and earned a master's degree in marketing. She had a strong and mischievous personality that attracted people. Carmen was a loyal friend and comrade for many people, but a beautiful life in a large metropolis required a lot of expenses, and the girl had to work hard to ensure a decent standard of living. During the day, Carmen worked in the store as a marketer, and in her spare time she worked part-time in a gentleman's club. Despite her strange choice in the service industry, Carmen was a girl of strict rules and never allowed herself unnecessary and even more so undignified behavior, which was very much appreciated by important clients. It was there that she met an attractive and flamboyant man, Brad Callahan. Bradford James Joseph Callahan was born in New Zealand in April 1978. The boy's parents separated when he was 9 years old. Little Brad stayed with his mother, after which they moved to Australia. In 2001, Brad graduated from university and received an engineering degree in the construction industry. At the invitation of a large construction company, he moved to the UK, where he was offered a position as chief structural engineer for a large business complex. For important negotiations and added status, Brad turned to a gentleman's agency, and his choice fell on the beautiful Carmen. The man was intelligent, tall, black-haired, with bright dark eyes, but he could not afford a real relationship because of too much ambition and busy career. He had no free time for a permanent relationship. After a successful business dinner, Brad was conquered by the open and radiant Carmen. They continued informal communication, which was repeated again and again. After a while, they formed a good friendship, which later grew into love. The candy bouquet period flew by very quickly, and the lovers began to live together. Their life together was based on trust and care. They sincerely supported each other and looked absolutely happy. After a while, Carmen became pregnant, and Brad decided that the best solution for them would be to return to New Zealand, to a country with clean air and the measured course of life. They returned to Auckland. In March 2005, Carmen and Brad had their son Jack. Jack brought more joy and happiness into their lives. From the first days, Carmen and Brad took care of his safety and provided everything they needed for his happy childhood. To them, Jack was the most important thing in their lives. However, with the birth of their son, serious disagreements arose in their relationship. The first misunderstandings appeared because of the upbringing of the child. The relationship between the lovers became turbulent and unstable, and after 3 years they parted, but retained joint custody of the child. The breakup was difficult for both of them, but they sincerely tried to keep a good relationship for the sake of little Jack. Wanting support and wanting to be surrounded by family, Carmen and Jack moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, who also lived in Oakland. Gradually, emotional balance returned to Carmen, and she began a new life without Brad. In 2008, Carmen moved with her young son to a house on a neighboring street to Brad's so that the son would be closer to his father. The young woman, who lost her father at an early age, sincerely wished that her child would always have a father around as much as she could. Despite this decision, many of Carmen's friends and family thought the couple still had a good friendship, but they only spent time together for Jack's interests. However, life went on. Carmen and Brad tried to find happiness separately again. Brad continued to work as a construction engineer, and in May 2009 he started a new relationship with a girl and even got engaged. Carmen was busy raising her son and resumed her services in the gentleman's club, which quite hurt Brad. He sincerely believed that the mother of his child should never again be interested in dubious earnings. This disagreement became a boiling point in their good relationship. With each passing day, the situation grew more heated. Carmen gave ultimatums to Brad, and he in turn simply ignored the requests of the former lover. Nevertheless, Brad entered into a new marriage and was preparing to become a father again. New financial obligations directly reflected on the alimony, which he paid under the agreement Carmen for the maintenance of Jack. The money was the last straw in a series of scandals. On March 19, 2010, neighbors called the police. The police officers arrived and responded to an incident of domestic violence. Carmen attacked Brad during another quarrel and received a warning. the relationship finally deteriorated. Arguments did not stop even at a distance. Each new question regarding Jack was perceived by each party in the bayonet and with aggression. Once loving parents for a long time could not agree on what school Jack should go to, and it again led to a number of unsolvable problems and a chain of scandals. On June 29, 2010, Brad again came to Carmen's house to make a new written agreement to pay child support and to discuss a new school for Jack. Carmen was not satisfied with the document, and she kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left. 2 weeks later, Brad tried to speak to Carmen again, but she did not make contact. On July 13, 2010, he reported Carmen Tarmas missing to the police. The police took the report and began searching for the missing woman from video camera images and interviews with neighbors. Reconstructing the chronology of events since the last communication between Carmen and Brad, investigators found out some important details that should help in the search for the woman. They managed to find out that on June 29th, a surveillance camera recorded Carmen at a supermarket near her home. While inspecting the rented house where Carmen lived with Jack, the lack of a garbage can on the outside caught the attention of police. Inside the house, there were also traces of blood on the front door, on the washing machine, near the sink and shower. Forensic scientists used luminol to detect traces of blood left at the crime scene because it reacts with the iron contained in blood hemoglobin. The multiple patterns that appeared confirmed the presence of blood on the bathroom door and on the floor. The landlady told investigators that on June 29th, she heard loud screaming followed by prolonged crying and moaning. Recalling that day, she said she knocked on Carmen's door, but no one answered. She had to look out the window. She saw a street trash can and an overturned fabric horse, which is a drying rack usually made of wood or metal for drying clothes. Startled, the landlady called her husband, but while she waited for him to arrive, Brad walked out of Carmen's house and into the driveway. He was carrying soiled clothes in his hands, and upon seeing the landlady, Brad rushed to explain that Carmen had become ill after a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, the landlady noticed Brad's condition. He looked like he had just taken a shower. The woman had no reason to disbelieve the man's story and did not call the police. The search continued, and Carmen's cell phone caught the attention of the police. Messages were being sent from her phone on a regular basis, but the manner of communication and tone of the messages were different and did not resemble Carmen's previous manner of communication. The outgoing messages and calls continued until July 10th. Where did the woman go if she needed medical help, and why? The investigators did not have to look for answers to these questions for long. During further investigation, Carmen's car was found. In the back seat of the car was found luggage, clothes, and other belongings of the woman. The examination of the seized suitcase on some of the things were found traces of blood. A note was also found in the car indicating that Carmen owed money to the agency where she worked. In the glove compartment was an envelope with Misty's name on it and the sum of $270. Police Inspector Mark Benefield, after finding traces of blood in Carmen's car, first raised the possibility that the woman had been murdered. Police searched the countryside southeast of downtown Auckland for the body of Carmen Thomas after a new report that her car was spotted around the time she went missing, but the search was inconclusive. The investigation and search for the woman continued. When investigators examined Carmen's and Brad's phones at the same time, they discovered both phones had been nearby the entire time they were being searched, and Carmen's phone was not connected to a cell tower in Hamilton. Going forward, one of the most important pieces of evidence was the missing trash can. It remained to be seen if it could be the same bin that had disappeared from its place near the house, and that a neighbor had seen through her window on the day Carmen disappeared. But what did the trash can need to be inside the house for? The police did not refute the idea of the worst possible outcome, and rechecked Brad's cell phone and spending by examining his bank card details and traced his shopping list. On June 30th, Brad Callahan, a meat cleaver, and a large plastic container, as well as several garbage bags. By scrutinizing Brad's daily routine, police identified some exceptional events that did not fit into the young father's daily to-do list. It turned out that on one workday, Brad arrived at the construction site very early and walked alone around the property for a long time. It was strange, but not so strange that the workers who saw him would start reporting anyone about such an early presence of a supervisor at the construction site. Based on the evidence gathered, such as Carmen's cell phone and questionable purchases, Brad went from victim to suspect. Police believed that Brad Callahan killed his former lover by hitting her several times in the head and carefully hiding the body. On September 21st, Brad Callahan was arrested on charges of murdering Carmen Thomas and attempting to change the course of justice. He pleaded not guilty and is scheduled to stand trial. In a fateful coincidence, Brad's second son from a new lover was born at the time of his incarceration, which caused a wave of emotion and resentment in the young father who was in custody. The man broke down, and 9 days after his arrest, he pointed out to investigators the burial place of Carmen Thomas. Brad thought he had come up with the perfect plan, part of which was to make it appear that Carmen had gone to Hamilton and never returned. He was absolutely certain he had succeeded, but life made adjustments. Under questioning, he detailed the chain of events from that fateful day. After a bad conversation, Carmen kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left, but 5 minutes later, he came back into the house and hit Carmen in the head with a baseball bat with such force that she immediately fell unconscious. Blood spurted from her wound, staining the floor a bright red. Heavy breathing filled the room, and Brad stood over the body of his victim with a wild scowl in his eyes. He realized he had just done the irreparable, but he couldn't stop. In a fit of anger and resentment at Carmen's words, he threw several punches again. He knew that his act carried irreparable consequences, but everything remained in the shadow of his insane obsession. Memories flashed before Brad's eyes, happy and endless memories that were now gone forever. Brad knew that his life would be forever changed after that disastrous moment, and that he would not be able to get back everything that was, but it did not upset him at all, because by such an act he had solved his main problem, and Jack was now only his. Having come to his senses, Brad took a shower and then quietly left Carmen's house. In the days that followed, he sprang into action to get rid of Carmen's body and cover up the crime. Callahan called his friend and arranged to meet him outside the supermarket. He asked him to buy 3 black garbage bags, a bottle of kerosene and cleaning products, and waited for him outside the store, hoping to avoid suspicion. Brad then went back into the apartment and cleaned it up. He carefully wiped up the blood spatter and then wrapped the body in a bag and took it out in a trash can. In the following days, the defendant dismembered Carmen's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. He cut Carmen's legs from her torso at the hip joints. Each leg was cut through the knee into 2 pieces. Her arms and head were also severed from her torso. On July 3rd, he met a good friend at a boat ramp in Okahu Bay, near downtown Oakland. He told him that he had killed Carmen during an argument and needed help disposing of the body, but an attempt to dump the remains into the sea failed due to the friend's refusal to provide a boat. Over the next few days, he drove to Waitakere Ridge in West Auckland and buried the containers in a shallow grave. On July 7th, he drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot. He put a suitcase of clothes and several other bags of her personal belongings in the car to give the impression that the woman wanted to leave. But in his haste, he overlooked the fact that the suitcase also contained bloody clothes. After getting rid of the car, Brad began sending text messages from her cell phone to give the impression that Carmen was still alive. The criminal texted her friends, saying she wasn't feeling well and had been in bad shape for days. But Brad's perfect plan backfired on him. On October 1st, police went to the burial site Brad had indicated and discovered the body. Harmon Thomas's remains were found in plastic containers. They were carefully removed from a makeshift grave on Waitakere Ridge. An autopsy determined that Carmen Thomas had died from multiple blows to the head, with the fatal blow causing a compressed skull fracture. After multiple forensic examinations, Carmen's body was released to her family for burial. On October 13th, a private funeral was held at Green Lane Christian Center for Carmen Thomas, a young mother, a cheerful, kind, and successful woman. Little Jack, who all along had waited and hoped to see and hug his mom, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket. On February 8, 2011, the first court hearing for Carmen Thomas took place. Judge Wenning found the crime committed was unintentional and took into account Brad's explanation that he acted on emotion. He acknowledged that it was done in a fit of rage, but Judge Wenning was less lenient when it came to the cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callahan was newly charged with attempting to change the course of justice. A summary of the police case shows that at 8:45 a.m. on July 29, 2010, Callahan struck Mrs. Thomas several times in the head, resulting in her death. He then texted a friend to bring 3 garbage bags and a bottle of kerosene. During the ensuing period, Callahan dismembered Miss Thomas's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. On November 25, 2011, a retrial was held. Police officers who had been working on the case filled the High Court in Auckland when Bradford Callahan unexpectedly made 2 guilty pleas. Brad Callahan, who had previously denied guilt, suddenly admitted to murder and attempting to change the course of justice after Carmen's death. The judge said it was one of the most serious cases of attempting to pervert the course of justice, calling Brad's actions just about the most serious case of attempted perversion of justice there can be. The judge also felt the murder of Carmen Thomas was brutal, but not so brutal as to result in the harshest sentencing laws. The 33-year-old man was sentenced in Auckland High Court, where a large public gallery was filled with Thomas's friends and family, including her parents, who were visiting from South Africa. Judge Wenning sentenced Brad Callahan to life imprisonment for murder and 6 years in prison for attempting to pervert the course of justice. He also condemned the lengths Callahan went to in order to cover his tracks. The sentences are to be served concurrently. Judge Wenning also said the minimum sentence for the perverting the course of justice charge was insufficient to bring Brad Callahan to justice. Mr. Callahan passed judgment on himself by his actions that day, and it had a devastating effect on 2 families, said Detective Inspector Mark Benefield. Callahan's supporters left court without comment. In a statement, the Thomas family said nothing can bring their Carmen back, and they are still angry because of it. But they are grateful that Brad will be away for an extended period of time so he can reflect on the enormous damage he caused to their own son in the first place. Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott, told the court in a victim impact statement that she felt completely destroyed by what happened to her daughter. After the verdict was announced, the officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Inspector Mark Benefield, told the court that the justice done is the result of hundreds of hours of police work over the past 10 weeks since Carmen Thomas was reported missing on July 13, 2010. Also, Detective Mark Benefield, during the interview, explained what the work to find Carmen consisted of. He explained that early on in the missing person investigation, they determined that Carmen was most likely murdered. Then the work of gathering evidence, as well as researching information, was carefully conducted. This required a great deal of time and effort to gather, and it was also necessary that proper legal procedures were followed. The detective reported that over the last few weeks, close cooperation with the defendant's employer had not been finalized. Attempts to further investigate part of the Victoria Street construction site would continue in order to find any evidence that might assist the investigation. Until today, We have been unable to comment on media reports about our activities at the facility because we have been very sensitive to the issues of litigation and preemptive contempt of court, said Mark Benefield. He did not rule out the possibility of further arrests and charges in connection with Carmen's death in the near future. Brad Callahan had the courage to take responsibility for his actions in this tragic saga, and he pleaded guilty to 2 charges. But that will in no way change what he did. For the hearts of Carmen's loved ones are broken, their world shattered. Living each new day without Carmen, each of her close family members feels completely destroyed. We will never forgive him for what he did to our family, said Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott. I could forgive someone for taking a life under certain circumstances, but I can never forgive this man for being able to strip a body and hide it in containers, added her stepfather Wayne. Callahan's attorney, Stuart Grieve, said his client acted responsibly and does not intend to file a motion. Can a sentence with parole eligibility after 13 years and 8 months be called a ridiculous miscarriage of justice? Obviously, since New Zealand only records about 50 murders a year for the entire country, any crime that is a little out of the ordinary is covered extensively by the national media, as are the court cases for those crimes. It's possible that there was an overbearing bias against the victim at trial because of her line of work. But even if Carmen was antagonistic and pissed Brad off, we don't blame the victim for having her life taken from her, do we? If Brad had wanted sole custody of his son, he likely would have used this prejudice about Carmen's work and gotten his way because he had the opportunity. Instead, he beat her to death and tried to cover it up. In this situation, we are not diagnosing, we are only speculating. In summarizing this gruesome story, the same question comes up repeatedly. It is understandable that in a fit of rage and uncontrollable anger, a person can commit irreparable acts. But what feelings can a healthy person have when he comes up with a plan to dismember a once tenderly loved person? Little Jack Callahan is currently living in another town under an assumed name in the temporary care of his grandmother. He doesn't know that his daddy took his mom's life and must never find out because it wasn't his fault. Absurd. In one of the brightest and most bustling cities, a tragedy took place that shocked everyone. Ayajan Yadalova, a young and ambitious woman with dreams of a bright future, became the victim of a horrific crime. This incident not only took her life but also exposed serious societal issues like violence and negligence within law enforcement. Ayajan's family and loved ones were devastated, and their pain was deepened by the fact that the police ignored their desperate pleas for help. During this challenging time, they felt like they were losing not just a daughter and sister, but also their hope for justice. Friends who remembered her kindness and warm personality were stunned by the criminal's cruelty, who continued to post provocative updates on social media even while behind bars. But let's start from the beginning. Ayajan's story soon became a symbol of the fight for justice, reminding everyone of the value of life and the importance of protecting women. This tragedy touched many hearts and made people think about how to prevent such cases in the future. In Almaty, a city where life usually moved along peacefully, March 19, 2021, became a day of unease. The remains found scattered in different parts of the city shocked residents and left a deep scar in many hearts. Shortly after these horrifying discoveries, the family of 19-year-old Ayajan Yadalova faced a brutal reality. They had to go through a difficult DNA test process to confirm that the remains belonged to their missing relative. Behind every smile was a lurking shadow ready to break free, and now the entire city found itself in the grip of an invisible manipulator. Before the world knew of Ayajan's tragic fate, on March 18th, she was full of hope and excitement. That day she uploaded a new video on TikTok, dancing and laughing, radiating positivity and joy. On screen she looked genuinely happy, and her followers could feel her energy. Ayajan was always eager to share moments from her life and creativity with her audience, and at that time, her dreams of a future filled with design and success seemed entirely within reach. However, there was another less visible side to Ayajan's life. Secret conversations and promising talks brought a stranger into her world, whose true nature remained hidden. His intentions had nothing in common with her dreams, and while she eagerly awaited the chance to launch her brand, shadows were closing in around her. That evening, as her joyful plans began to crumble, Ayajan had no idea that fate had a dark turn in store for her. Ayajan was in her 4th year at the Academy of Design and Fashion, where every day brought new knowledge and inspiration. She was one of the most dedicated students, never missing a class without a good reason. Even on a day when many of her classmates might have taken a break, she remained committed to her studies. That morning, full of enthusiasm, she went to class, dreaming of her future in the world of fashion. After her classes, Ayajan worked at a nail salon as a manicurist. This job not only provided her with an income, but also gave her a chance to connect with different people, helping her develop both personal and professional skills. Her love for sewing started back in her childhood when she first made a dress for her doll or crafted a small souvenir for her mom. Over time, this passion only grew stronger, and now Ayajan was determined to pursue a future in fashion. However, just days before she disappeared, a quiet wave of changes swept through the city, leaving a sense of unease in every corner. One question lingered. Who would be the next victim in the dark game started by this invisible manipulator? On the night of March 20th, 2021, Almaty was gripped by fear as the search for 19-year-old Ayajan Yadilova began. Friends and family, noticing her sudden disappearance, immediately raised the alarm. Ayajan, known for her hard work and sense of responsibility, never neglected her commitments. On the morning of March 19th, as she headed home from her job at the nail salon, she felt satisfied. Her day had gone well, and she'd made new connections. But something went terribly wrong that evening. The dormitory where Ayajan lived, not far from the Academy of Design and Fashion, was usually filled with friendly chatter and laughter. But on that night, as the doors locked at 11 p.m., Ayajan wasn't there. Moral Bakirov, the dorm supervisor, later admitted that he'd never seen Ayajan stay out late or miss a night. When her friends began to worry, they approached Moral, and together they decided to contact the police. However, the response they received was cold. "Wait it out. She'll come back when she's done having fun." As the hours passed with no sign of her, Ayajan's relatives from Taldykorgan began losing hope. Even her boyfriend had no idea where she might be. This pushed her family to reach out to the police once again, urging them to start a search. Ayajan's older sister, who lived in Almaty, tried to file a missing persons report but was met with indifference. The police told her they were all busy with protests and advised her to wait. Frustrated but determined, the family decided to try again, but still, the authorities showed little interest. Realizing they wouldn't get much help, they turned to local volunteers for assistance. Flyers with Ayajan's picture were posted all over Almaty. Volunteers, full of determination, organized search efforts, hoping to find Ayajan safe and sound. Looking back at the events leading up to her disappearance, it's important to note that Ayajan eagerly enrolled in the Academy of Design and Fashion, leaving her hometown of Taldykorgan filled with hope and ambition. Alongside her studies, she actively sewed custom-made clothing and developed her online store, where she launched her brand, Ayalan. This business brought her financial independence and a sense of fulfillment from the creative process. Recently, her shop had been doing exceptionally well, with a growing number of orders that filled her with joy and inspiration. To fulfill her dream of expanding into the Turkish market, Ayajan signed up for Turkish language courses. Despite the challenges, she showed persistence, and her teachers noted her dedication and eagerness to learn. Their belief in her potential only fueled her determination. There was a light of resolve in her eyes, and every step she took brought her closer to her goals. Her shifts at the nail salon where she worked part-time usually ended around 9 p.m. Ayajan always made sure to leave her workstation spotless, believing it added a welcoming touch for clients. As she locked the doors, she felt hopeful, confident that her hard work was paying off. But fate had an unexpected twist in store for her. By March 21st, the search for Ayajan Yadilova had intensified, and the police finally got involved, forming a special investigation team to handle this complex case. On that day, the tireless efforts of the volunteers who had been working around the clock finally paid off. They obtained a crucial lead. They found the taxi driver who had picked up Ayajan and a young man on March 19th in the Nurkant neighborhood. The volunteers immediately passed this information to the police, who quickly obtained footage from security cameras. The video clearly showed Ayajan entering the elevator of a high-rise building with an unidentified man. This discovery marked a turning point in the investigation, sparking hope that there was still a chance to save her. It took investigators only a few minutes to identify the young man and locate his address. On the evening of March 21st at around 10 p.m., police officers arrived at the residence of 28-year-old Rahman Berdid Taribekov. According to reports, he was at home but refused to open the door, further raising the officers' suspicions. After a brief discussion, they decided to break in. When they forced their way inside, they were met with a horrifying scene. Blood stains everywhere and a dismembered body lying on the floor. Even the most seasoned detectives, accustomed to such grim discoveries, were shaken by what they found. The apartment's owner wasn't found right away. He had hidden himself carefully, hoping to avoid law enforcement. However, once they finally tracked him down, he attempted to take his own life. Fortunately, first responders arrived in time to administer first aid before the paramedics got there. He was rushed into emergency surgery, and while doctors worked to save his life, police began collecting evidence and piecing together the full story of what happened. The criminal would finally have to face justice for his horrific actions. After spending several days in the hospital and once his condition had stabilized, Taribekov was transferred to a detention center. This move was crucial not only for his safety, but also to ensure that the investigation could proceed without delay. Public interest in the case was growing rapidly, and it was clear it would attract widespread attention. While the suspect was still in the hospital, his rented apartment was sealed off and a thorough forensic investigation took place, involving the city's top crime scene investigators and experts. What they uncovered inside shocked even the most hardened detectives to their core. At first glance, it was hard to believe that someone who appeared so ordinary could have committed such unspeakable acts. The apartment contained a human scalp, skin, extracted teeth and nails, all meticulously placed in separate plastic bags, almost as if they were harmless trinkets. It felt like something straight out of a horror movie, and even the most experienced officers understood that this was not just a crime, but a chilling display of pure madness. Additionally, investigators found dismembered body parts and a skull in the apartment. As the medical examiners later confirmed, the victim's head had been boiled in water for an extended period, leaving nothing but the skull behind. The entire scene was profoundly disturbing, and even the most seasoned law enforcement officers struggled to keep their composure in the face of such horror. As they gathered evidence and searched for more answers in Ayajan's case, law enforcement found themselves confronted with a true nightmare. In the days following her disappearance, other parts of her body were discovered scattered around the city, tossed in dumpsters and abandoned basements. These horrifying discoveries painted a grim and sinister picture that investigators tried desperately to piece together. The family's last hope of identifying the remains through DNA testing was shattered when they began to understand the sheer magnitude of the tragedy. Ayajan Yadalova went missing on March 19th, and shortly afterward, her family received the devastating confirmation. The remains found across the city did in fact belong to their daughter. During questioning, the suspect, who was found guilty, recounted the events of the night between March 19th and 20, when he and Ayajan had an argument. According to him, at around 11 p.m., he lost control and killed her. Realizing he could be caught, he decided to dispose of her body by dismembering it. That same night, he took several parts out of his apartment and left them scattered across the city, as if trying to completely erase any trace of his crime. When investigators asked about any possible connection between him and the victim, he firmly denied having any. But this claim still needed to be verified, and Ayajan's family was left bewildered. Why would he go to the extent of pulling out her teeth, removing her skin, and cutting her nails if he was simply trying to cover up his crime? Ayajan's family began to suspect that she might not have been his first victim. As the investigation progressed, it was discovered that Taribekov had previously studied at a medical academy to become a pharmacist, but was expelled for poor performance. This information only deepened investigators' suspicions that the body parts might have been used for some sort of medical or commercial purpose. Forensic experts began digging into his social media conversations and checking all the women he had interacted with. Fortunately, none of them were harmed, but the investigation continued to delve deeper into his life. During the investigation, a chat between Taribekov and Ayazhin on a dating site was uncovered. When this information leaked online, many started speculating about the possibility that Ayazhin might have entered into a relationship with him for financial reasons. These rumors sparked a wave of discussions, with countless people sharing their theories about what might have happened. Attention was also drawn to the footage showing Ayazhin entering the elevator with the young man. However, her friends and acquaintances were quick to defend her, insisting that she was modest and always respected boundaries in her interactions with men. Ayazhin's family knew how much effort she had put into building her online store and clothing brand. They were convinced that Taribekov had lured her to his apartment under the pretense of business, possibly to take measurements or place an order. They simply couldn't believe that such a ruthless person could have set such a trap. Ayazhin's roommate in the dorm, who was someone she confided in about her deepest thoughts, recalled some unsettling events before her disappearance. Ayazhin had recently mentioned that a man had shown interest in her brand and wanted to buy her entire collection. While this news initially excited her, it also made her a bit wary, since Ayazhin was always cautious around strangers. Investigators concluded that Taribekov might have orchestrated this meeting to lure her into a trap under the guise of a business opportunity. At the center of it all was a man named Rakhman Berdid Taribekov, who, according to the investigation, had connected with Ayazhin Yadilova through a popular social media platform. Using the excuse that he needed clothing from her brand, he convinced her to come to his place where the terrible incident seemingly took place. Ayazhin's family went through unimaginable pain as they waited for her body to be released for burial. Those days were filled with unbearable uncertainty and fear. Her loved ones desperately sought any information about what had happened to their daughter, experiencing an overwhelming sense of grief. It wasn't until April 16th, 2021, almost a month later, that her body was finally handed over for the funeral. Ayazhin was laid to rest in her hometown of Taldykorgan, where friends, family, and acquaintances gathered to pay their final respects and say goodbye. The atmosphere was thick with sorrow and loss as people shared memories of her kindness and vibrant spirit. The investigation faced numerous rumors and gossip that tarnished Yadilova's reputation. Messages exchanged between her and Taribekov, obtained by investigators, proved that accusations of her being promiscuous were completely baseless. This only fueled the heated discussions in the community, where her friends and acquaintances refused to believe that Taribekov was capable of such brutality. Teachers and classmates of Taribekov described him as a quiet and modest young man who would never commit a crime, claiming he was either framed or caught up in some misunderstanding. Meanwhile, law enforcement conducted countless forensic examinations to uncover the truth and gather all the evidence. The family's attorney, Kadirejjan Alim Januli, mentioned in one of his interviews that the case consisted of around 30 volumes with over 30 forensic examinations conducted. This extensive investigation demanded tremendous effort and time from the authorities. Despite this, psychiatric evaluations confirmed that Taribekov was sane and fully aware of his actions when he committed the crime. At the trial, which marked the final chapter of this horrific case, Ayazhin's family demanded the harshest possible punishment for the criminal, along with compensation for emotional damages totaling 26 billion tenge. After carefully reviewing all the details, the court handed down the maximum sentence of 25 years in prison, but they found no grounds for imposing a life sentence. However, the court did partially grant the civil lawsuit, awarding 20 million tenge in compensation, which, though only a small measure, could at least offer some relief to the family during their painful ordeal. Ayazhin Yadilova's relatives recalled with horror and anger the fateful day when they first went to the local police station, desperately hoping for help. Their anxiety was genuine and urgent, but to their immense disappointment, law enforcement ignored their repeated pleas to launch an immediate search for the missing young woman. This refusal not only shocked the family, but became an unbearable burden that they couldn't leave behind, amplifying their sense of helplessness and fear. Every hour that Ayajan was in danger turned into a torturous wait for her family, intensifying their worst fears. In one of his emotional interviews, Ayajan's brother, overcome with grief, spoke about the police's inaction, which led to the loss of critical days in the search for his sister. They felt time slipping away, and with every passing minute, a sense of hopelessness grew stronger. The perpetrator, realizing that no one was taking any active steps, continued his gruesome acts without fear or hesitation. He mercilessly disposed of Ayajan's body, unaware that with every minute, her family was losing hope of ever seeing her alive again. A month after the tragedy, the family laid Ayajan to rest with heavy hearts, knowing they would never have a proper goodbye. The closed zinc coffin became a haunting symbol of their fear and loss, and each of them wished they could see her one last time, feel her kindness, and experience the warmth she so generously shared with everyone around her. Their hearts were filled with bitterness and regret, as they now understood they had lost her bright eyes and genuine smile forever. The police, on their part, refused to admit any mistakes, insisting that all necessary measures had been taken promptly and on time. However, the facts told a different story. The delay at the start of the investigation only deepened the family's suffering, raising even more questions and frustration. Ayajan's loved ones couldn't understand how their pain and fear could be so easily dismissed, knowing that time was working against them. This sense of helplessness and despair wasn't felt by the family alone. Ayajan's friends also found themselves overwhelmed with anger and resentment toward a system that was supposed to protect them. When investigators finally began collecting evidence and conducting interviews, they encountered a barrage of rumors tarnishing Ayajan's reputation. These accusations, spread by ill-wishers, turned out to be baseless, adding even more bitterness to her family's suffering. They knew their Ayajan as a kind, compassionate, and bright individual, and couldn't believe that anyone could be capable of such cruelty toward her. Each new fact revealed only intensified their emotional pain, making them feel even more isolated and alone in their grief. The crime against Ayajan Yarolova left an indelible mark, not just on her family and friends, but on the entire community, becoming a tragedy that stirred the hearts of many. Ayajan was a young, ambitious, and talented woman who aspired to develop her own brand and build a bright future full of hopes and dreams. She had plans that extended beyond her career, envisioning a personal life filled with happiness and achievements. But her life was cut short in the most tragic way, exposing deep-rooted systemic issues such as the negligence of law enforcement and the pervasive violence in society, demanding urgent attention and change. Ayajan's family, in the midst of unbearable loss, painfully recognized that the police's inaction had cost them precious time. Her friends, remembering her with sorrow, couldn't help but notice how disturbingly cynical Tarabekov's social media page appeared. Even while in custody, he continued posting provocative messages. One of his statuses, "Smile at life, and it will surely smile back at you," was especially brazen given the crime he had committed. How could someone speak about the joy of life after taking it away from another person? These words only deepened the bitterness and sense of helplessness felt by everyone who knew Ayajan and remembered her kindness, joyfulness, and sincerity. Ayajan's brother, with deep sorrow in his heart, expressed his hope for justice in one of his emotional interviews. "I believe in the law of karma," he said with genuine conviction, confident that sooner or later everyone who commits evil will have to face the consequences of their actions. His words carried powerful emotion as he declared that, despite all the suffering, justice would eventually prevail. Even in the darkest moments of their lives, a spark of hope still burned, despite the darkness surrounding them. The criminal's motive remained unknown, but it was clear that what he did brought him some kind of twisted satisfaction. The The trial of Taribekov became a symbol of the fight for justice, drawing public attention and sparking widespread outrage. But for Ayajan's family, it didn't change the fact that their beloved daughter and sister had been brutally taken from them. The case raised many questions about moral responsibility and the importance of being vigilant and aware of those around us, as such a tragedy could happen to anyone. The crime against Ayajan was a grim reminder that every life is precious, and that we must do everything we can to prevent similar cases in the future. Let her story be a call to action, prompting stronger efforts to prevent violence and protect women's rights in society, urging all of us to reflect on how we can make the world a safer and more just place to live. Paula Andrea Salazar was born on September 6, 2015, in Venezuela. Her mother, Andrina Bermudos Mediand, was from Maturina, Menegas. Her father, Leonardo Salazar, was from Tucupitu, a town in the state of Delta Amacuro. A year after Paula was born in September 2016, the couple decided to immigrate with their child to Ecuador. They were looking for a better life for themselves and their daughter, a month after moving to Quito, capital of Ecuador. Relationship in the family deteriorated for a number of reasons. Andreina decided to break up with Leonardo and soon moved to Cuenca, the third largest city in Ecuador. She took Paula with her. In Cuenca lived the mother of her best friend, who kindly offered to let her and the girl stay in the house while they found another place to live and work. Leonardo, the girl's father, given the breakup and other circumstances, decided to return to Venezuela, to his hometown of Tucupitu, and after a while immigrated again, this time to Trinidad and Tobago. At the time, Leonardo had already been disabled for a long time. The man's left arm had been completely disabled after an accident he had suffered while driving a motorcycle at a very young age. Since the man could not use his left arm, it was apparently difficult for him to find a good job even in Ecuador's capital city. After Andreina moved to Cuenca, she almost completely stopped communicating with Leonardo, only informing him once that she has taken a job on a farm in Tapacundo. A few months after separating from Leonardo, Andreina entered into a new romantic relationship with a man named Washington Andreas Aymaro. Andreas was a local Ecuadorian, and more importantly, he was the owner of the farm where Andreina worked. The man grew up in a wealthy family. When Paula was about a year and a half, Andreina moved to Anand together with Paula. Andreas and Andreina had a child together on April 7, 2019. With a newborn baby, family became happier and more united. However, everything changed when an event happened on March 27, 2020. It completely changed the lives of everyone involved. At the time, family was living well, enjoying every day, and things were going well on the farm. On one such day, as happy as it seemed, Andreas took Paula and by car went with her to the flower plantations. On the way there, girl got very sick. She became dizzy and began to vomit. Andreas had no choice but to stop at a public restroom. As soon as he and the girl entered it, Paula vomited again. He decided to leave her alone for a few minutes and went back to the car to find a change of clothes, since the girl's clothes were all dirty. When Andreas returned, he found Paula lying with her head in the toilet bowl, and the man immediately pulled the girl out, tried to give her first aid, and soon brought her to the hospital. When the 4-year-old girl was handed over to doctors, she no longer showed any signs of life. Doctors stated, Paula dead. After the doctors on duty performed an initial examination and assessed the girl's condition, they realized that the story Andreas told them was full of inconsistencies. For example, the doctors determined that the first glance that the girl had bruises on her body and face, the nature of which could not be attributed to the information her foster father told them. Medical protocol in such cases requires doctors to contact the police. Indeed, the situation itself suggested this. Shortly after the police arrived, Andreas was arrested as a suspect in Paula's murder. Although Andreas said Paula has drowned in the toilet bowl, the autopsy of the body revealed something much darker. First of all, the test showed that the girl had been dead for about 24 hours when she arrived at the hospital, which doesn't fit with the man's version of events. The girl's foster father claimed that he gave Paula first aid and cardiopulmonary resuscitation. and that is all happened just 20 minutes before he took her to the hospital. On the other hand, the autopsy found that the girl has several broken ribs, multiple microtraumas, a cracked spine, and sepsis, which caused her death. It became apparent that Paula's death was not an accident, as her small body has a significant number of both recent and old injuries. Leonardo Salazar, the girl's father, learned of Paula's death on March 30, 3 days after the events. His mother, who was still in Venezuela, had informed him of his daughter's death by the phone. She herself, in turn, learned it from Andreina's friend. It should be mentioned that after Leonardo has left Ecuador and Andreina had started a new relationship, she stopped all communication with him. That is why, for 3 days, Leonardo didn't know anything about her tragedy. Until that time, he could see her only through the pictures Andreina and his mutual friends had sent him. In addition, Andreina blocked Leonardo in all social media, preventing him from communicating with Paula. She also cut off communication with almost all of Leonardo's relatives. Andreina even turned almost all of their mutual friends against the girl's birth father, telling them about his lack of desire to communicate with Paula, and so Leonardo was able to learn of his daughter's death. However, Andreina's family informed him of an alternative cause of death. They told him that Paula died of complications caused by COVID. At the time, Ecuador, like the rest of the world, was under quarantine due to the pandemic. At the time, however, there were virtually no deaths from the coronavirus in the country. Leonardo was undoubtedly very suspicious that his daughter might have died from COVID, so he immediately began researching statistics on death from the virus in Ecuador. The statistics were posted on social media and news websites. Leonardo immediately noticed that there were no children among the few victims of the coronavirus in Ecuador. Leonardo's relatives helped him to investigate, and one of them soon sent him a newspaper article that mentioned the arrest of Andreas, who was suspected of killing Paula. Leonardo then began calling Andreina daily, and it wasn't until 10 days later that she decided to call him back herself. In that conversation, Andreina rather coldly informed Leonardo that Paula had died of COVID and that she could not give him more information because her lawyers had forbidden her to do so. The next step Leonardo took was to create a Facebook page together with an acquaintance of his dedicated to Paula, as well as an Instagram profile called Justice for Paula. The published posts caused a huge backlash across social media. Their main goal was to bring those responsible for his daughter's death to justice. On the same day that Andreina called Leonardo, she arrived at the morgue to begin dealing with her daughter's funeral, even though the prosecutor who worked on the case asked for more time to investigate the body. But the girl's funeral took place on April 10, 2020. Andreina simply did not allow a second autopsy to be performed on the girl. Thanks to the information posted on social media, Andreina's friends, people in her circle, contacted Leonardo and told him about the sad life Paula had in the years before her death. They sent Leonardo the information they had, most of which was based on isolated recordings of conversations, photos, audio recordings, and similar things. According to witnesses, ever since Paula's mother moved in with Andreas, girl had to endure abuse from her stepfather, as well as her own mother. Not only did Andrea allow her daughter to be treated this way, but she herself was directly involved in all of this. Everyone said that they only saw Paula happy and cheerful when she was playing alone. In the presence of her stepfather, the girl looked depressed, acted shy, and became suddenly very frightful. At one point, the little girl told people she knew that her mother and stepfather beat her because of she misbehaved. One day she even confessed that as punishment, Andreas pushed her and she hit her head on the wall. Paula called her stepfather nothing less than a monster and was undoubtedly very afraid of him. The little girl constantly had nightmares, and as a young child she already suffered from insomnia. The couple initially preferred that the girl, who was 2 years old at the time of moving into the stepfather's home, sleep alone. When falling asleep, she often cried, but no one paid any attention to her. In addition, her mother and stepfather forced her to tuck in on her own, without help. Moreover, her mother, Andreina, had been teaching her how to cook since she was 2 years old. this was something out of the realm of reason. Paula was forced to cook her own breakfast and dinners because her mother liked to sleep in the mornings and take a break from the baby on the evening. She simply didn't want to take care of her daughter. Not only that, Andrina was not bothered by the fact that the girl has to cope with baking oven by herself, despite the dangers. At the preschool, where mother had placed Paula, girl constantly complained of pain in her legs and back and often stated that she could not walk. Her constant complaints, as well as the bruises on her body, forced the teacher to show her to the doctors at the health center. After an examination, they concluded that the girl was being mistreated in the family. The girl's teachers then called the special police organization so they could investigate the girl's abuse in her family. Officials took up the case and decided to send the girl somewhere she could be safe while the investigation process was underway. As a result, on October 16, 2019, Paula was temporarily transferred to her uncle, Andreina's brother. A hearing on the case was set for December 4, 2019. Unfortunately, the teachers who were supposed to testify never showed up. For whatever reason, they were unable to attend this hearing. As a result, it was decided to schedule a retrial for February 27, 2020. But even this time, Paula's teachers simply did not show up. The court was forced to dismiss all charges against Paula's parents, and then she was returned to her mother. Exactly 1 month later, on March 27, the girl died. And the exact reason the teachers did not want to attend either of the two hearings is still unknown. It is speculated that Andreina may have bribed the teachers or simply convinced them that, although the girl had some problems, the parents were not responsible for what their daughter said about them. After Paula's death, Andreas was placed in protective custody for the duration of the investigation, but he soon appealed this decision. As a result, a hearing was held on June 12, 2020, in which the judge set a restraining order and also determined that the man could be released to house arrest. But during the hearing, which was held via video conference, Andreas announced that he was dropping his appeal. At the time, Leonardo was still engaged in a social media campaign. He also asked his subscribers for financial support to be able to travel from Trinidad and Tobago to Ecuador. He wanted to file a complaint against Andreina, Paula's mother, before it was too late. At the time, Andreina had not yet been charged and was free. Fortunately, Leonardo was able to obtain sufficient financial aid as well as free legal advice from two Ecuadorian lawyers, Osvaldo and Alejandro, who unselfishly offered him support and assistance in the lawsuit. Leonardo had to cross the border between Trinidad and Venezuela. He had to risk his life, float on the raft, and then cross the entire border from Naturín to San Cristobal. He had to book private transfers since the pandemic had cancelled all services and he could not use the usual routes to get to Ecuador. Because of the pandemic situation, all maritime and land borders of Venezuela were closed, so only few regular flights to 4 or 5 countries could be counted in the following months. Once Leonardo arrived in the state of Táchira, he had to cross the border into Colombia over rugged terrain, dangerous in itself. He then took a bus to the town of Ipalerso and continued on through the hills and plains to the Brumichet Ridge, the border between Colombia and Ecuador. Then Leonardo took a cab and drove to Quito. On June 30, he had a meeting with a lawyer. Immediately upon arrival, father of a deceased girl filed a complaint against the ex-girlfriend to also be considered as a suspect in Paula's murder. On July 6, 2020, Andreas was indicted and the woman appeared in court, which stated that she should not be remained in custody and the house arrest would be sufficient and that she had to report to justice twice a week. As a result, both Andreas and Andreina were charged with murder, the maximum punishment for which in the Ecuadorian Penal Code was about 13 years in prison. In November 2020, the first hearing in the case was held. At the time, a specific date for the start of the trial was still to be announced. During the hearing, Leonardo's attorney spoke to their concern about Andreina's possible escape, as she had previously attempted to take her own life with pills. They also applied for Andreina to be fitted with an electronic monitoring bracelet. The judge decided to grant the lawyer's request and also reduced the number of days the suspect had to appear in court to once a week instead of 2. However, a few days later, Andreina demanded to reconsider the decision of the necessity of wearing an electronic bracelet. On November 16, another hearing was held to reconsider these decisions. Undoubtedly, all these details delayed the trial, but fortunately, the judge was able to set a date. It was set for December. The trial of Andreas and Andreina did not receive extensive media coverage. However, much of the information somehow made its way onto social media. And yet, because of the pandemic, which was a major topic in the information field, some of the facts went unreported. The trial began on January 14, 2021. At the time, there still wasn't any decision made about Andreina's alternative ways of imprisonment, and Andreas was held in the regional detention center. The trial was held behind closed doors, and no representative of the media was present. In addition, some of the participants connected to the hearing via video link. According to the doctor who performed the autopsy on the girl, Paula had nearly all of her spinal discs rebuilt, some of her ribs were broken, and some had already fused. This meant that the girl has broken ribs before, which had eventually healed on their own. She also had nail stigmata, a condition in which nails grow into the skin, bruises and scratches on her face and body, fluid accumulation in her lungs, scars on her head, and lacerations on her colon. According to the assessment, it was the later injuries that caused the infection to develop and gradually lead to sepsis, which ultimately caused death. The autopsy report also confirmed that by the time Paula was taken to the hospital by Andreas, she had been dead for about 24 hours. The amount of internal and external injuries reflected the level of cruelty to which the little girl had been subjected, as well as the level of carelessness shown by her guardians, who had never once taken her to the doctors. On top of this, the girl was malnourished, underweight, and too diminutive for her age, with mineral and nutritional deficiencies. Regarding Paula's injuries, Andreina, the girl's mother, tried to convince her family friends that the child has a lot of psychological problems, and that the consequence of these problems was a tendency to self-torture, through which Paula tried to attract attention to herself. According to the girl's mother, when her younger brother was born, Paula began to lack parental attention, stopped sleeping at night, and tried to manipulate everyone through crying. The trial also revealed that in October 2019, when Paula was supposed to remain in her uncle's custody, according to the board's decision, she actually continued to stay at her parents' house and only slept at her uncle's house for a few nights. In other words, the measures taken by the police organization did not have the desired effect. In turn, it was possible to establish that in 2017, only a few months after Leonardo's departure from Ecuador, the girl began to suffer from abuse. It most likely began immediately after Andreina enters into relationship with Andreas. The trial was attended by more than 40 witnesses of the accusing party, who were able to confirm the fact that Paula had to endure abuse for at least 3 years of her short life. At the last hearing, before the judge handed down the verdict, Andreina stated that she took sole responsibility for the child's abuse. The woman claimed that she herself had beaten Paula with a belt and at times with her fists. Through this statement, the girl's mother actually attempted to remove blame from her land. She said to Rekbeat that he was innocent, that he had nothing to do with it, and that he had never mistreated Paula. Andreina also stated that she chastised her daughter for causing her problems with her new husband. Breaking up with her new husband meant being back on the streets and losing the financial stability she could only have around this man. Taking care of her daughter was her last priority. After becoming acquainted with Paula's life situation, the judges were concerned about the couple's newborn son, but it's safe to say that this child, unlike Paula, was never abused. It must be said that Andreas has indeed chosen to exercise his right to remain silent and has never made any statement about the incident since his arrest. By the February 3rd, 2021, Paula's trial was finished and the couple was sentenced Both defendants were found guilty of murdering the girl. The maximum sentence for this crime is 13 years. Leonardo's original attorneys and the accusing party demanded exactly the maximum punishment for the perpetrators, but the chief judge decided to take into account an aggravating factor, namely that Paula was only 4 years old, which means that she could not defend herself against her attackers. As a result, the judge sentenced Andreina and Ingrius to 17 years and 4 months in prison. According to Ecuadorian law, the convicts have 3 days to appeal the verdict, so the couple was expected to appeal immediately. Even though Andreina was sentenced to 17 years and 4 months in prison, she still remained on house arrest and not went to jail. The fact is that the woman used her opportunity to appeal, so now the higher court needs to confirm her sentence for incarceration. In the meantime, the woman continues to comply with the measures that were originally taken. This is not the case with Ingrius, as he was arrested at the time of his appearance at the hospital with the dead girl. Undoubtedly, the fact that Andreina is still at large is causing public indignation and anger. Most importantly, the anger of Leonardo, who is worried that the woman might take advantage of the situation to escape justice.